Chapter 176. To find it easily, Shangguan Rui's eyes flashed bright, and turning to a guard at his side, he commanded, "Go find information regarding all the youngsters with the surname Shi in Yanjing City for me. I want to know who that boy is." The subordinate quickly accepted the order and left, leaving only the angry, stomping, and cursing Shangguan Zhenyu behind with Shangguan Rui. Shangguan Rui turned to glance at his sister and coldly snorted, a trace of disdain visible in his eyes. This royal sister was doted on by royal father till she had become incompetent. She even had delusions of marrying Hell King. If she continued this way and went out of control once more, she will surely fall heavily one day. I just hope she doesn't ruin the hard work that royal brother and I have achieved. At this time, the spectating crowd realized that nothing worth seeing would occur anymore and gradually dispersed. No one noticed that hidden in a shady corner of the street, a hawker dressed in plain gray clothing was fixedly watching Hell King Manor's gate. The hint of a smile appeared at a corner of his mouth, and soon after, he released a paper crane into the air. After a moment, the paper crane turned into a stream of light and landed in a courtyard. Sitting in the courtyard, there was an old man wearing white robes. The old man took the paper crane, and once he glanced at the information written on it, his face immediately flushed with excitement. After having traveled far and wide looking for something, it was found so easily. He hadn't expected that the young genius doctor they had been searching for more than a month would actually appear by himself. Moreover, he appeared to be connected with Hell King. Although Hell King's involvement will make things a bit complicated, but for that secret meridians technique, his Jiang family would do everything possible to grasp control of this youngster. The old man burnt the paper crane in his hand, and after pondering for a moment, he abruptly said in a low voice, "Quick, tell Xia Chongming to come meet me." A subordinate accepted the order and rushed to comply, and not a moment later, Dr. Xia arrived still dressed in his refining robes. Without waiting for Dr. Xia to open his mouth and inquire what was wrong, Elder Jiang had already begun to quietly speak. "The boy that caused you to kneel in defeat has already been found. You know what you should do, right?" Dr. Xia's expression hardened, strong hatred present in his eyes. But quickly covering it up, he lowered his head in a bow and said, "Elder Jiang, please rest assured. This subordinate will certainly discover that boy's secret meridians technique, and I will personally present it in front of you." He had barely entered Hell King Manor when she saw Qing Long, Bai Hu, and Wu Yu, walking together towards her to welcome her. Following behind them was the fourth-rank doctor from yesterday, Old Qiu, who had discussed the jade fire toad with He. After confirming that Nangong Yu's safety wasn't in danger, Wu Xian and Xian Wu had returned to their respective posts. So at this time Qing Long, Old Qiu, and the others' attitude had changed 180 degrees when they saw He. They now treated her the same way they would a bodhisattva. Old Qiu's face was filled with confusion as he asked He, "Princess, this old man honestly can't figure out why the withered spiritual plants, that are devoid of spiritual power, can still have a healing effect, completely unlike a medicinal pill. Princess, what method did you use to neutralize the Yin congeal grass cold energy? Yesterday this old man kept trying to think of it until my head hurt, yet I was unable to come up with any methods." "Princess, your medical skills are miraculous. Stop." He's face stiffened and she interrupted his chatter, "Can you stop calling me princess? Nangong Yu and I are not in the kind of relationship that you imagine us to be." Hearing that, everyone standing nearby paused. After staring at each other in dismay for a good long while, Qing Long finally coughed quietly while his eyes avoided looking at He. "Princess likes to joke. All of us here in Hell King Manor have already personally witnessed your relationship with Master. Especially on the night the vortex appeared, when we opened the door of Master's room, we all saw you and Master." Chapter 177, Wu Yu lacks integrity. Qing Long hadn't yet finished speaking, but He was already blushing. Without hearing any more, she could easily guess what this group of people had seen, and at this moment, she really wanted to find a hole to bury herself in. Bai Hu, however, thoughtlessly smiled. "To address you as princess is Master's order. If princess has an objection, you can talk to Master." "Oh, by the way, Master has been waiting a long time for you in the water pavilion. Princess, please quickly go. Do you think that there is any use to complain about it to him? Grinding her teeth, Heshi removed a box of food from her space and handed it to Bai Hu. This is the meal that your honored master ordered yesterday, quickly send it to him. I'll go and prepare the herbal medicine that will be needed later. Bai Hu didn't dare take the box. Instead, he took an exaggerated step backwards, waving his hands in denial. Princess, please spare this subordinate. If master sees that the one who enters isn't princess, and rather it's this subordinate, he will skin me alive. Princess, you should quickly go and personally deliver it. Master will definitely be happy to see you, maybe it will help speed up the recovery of his condition and he will quickly get better too. As for dealing with the herbal medicine, old Xiao has already mastered it and is willing to help princess, right old Xiao? Yes, yes. Old Xiao stroked his beard, beaming at her. It's an honor for this old man to be able to help princess. Heshi's heart became depressed, yet with no excuses left, she turned around and walked towards Nangong Yu's water pavilion. At this moment, Heshi was still carrying the box of food in her hands, and because she had moved, the aroma of the food permeated the air. As Wu Yu watched it all play out nearby, he couldn't help but breathe in deeply. What is this smell? Wu Yu craned his neck towards the box of food, constantly trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was inside. His gluttonous behavior caused Bai Hu to burst into loud laughter, and patting Wu Yu's shoulder, he said, "This is princess specially prepared spiritual food, its delicious taste can be compared to the delicacy of a jade dish. I even dare to say that although you've sampled fine foods from all over the world, it absolutely can't compare with the food princess makes. Once you've tried it, you'll never crave any other food again." As one of Nangong Yu's subordinates and as one of the 4 ferocious beasts, Wu Yu was positioned at Gluttonous House. All it would take is for someone to see his post to know that he has a hobby dedicated to eating fine foods. So when he heard Bai Hu, the longing in his heart grew extremely difficult to endure. Blinking his eyes at Heshi, Wu Yu suddenly resembled a small loyal dog trying to act cute. Heshi froze when confronted by his foolish eyes. Was this still Gluttonous House's impressive-looking young master, Wu Yu? His foolishness was practically on the same level as Bai Hu's. The most depressing part though, was that this guy continuously circled around her, and as he jumped about, he repeatedly shouted, "Princess! Princess!" It was like the noise of a devil, piercing her ears, and Heshi was itching to slap this buzzing fly away. Even Qing Long couldn't stand watching this display, and holding his forehead, he wished he could just drag this shameless guy out of Hell King Manor. However, he understood Wu Yu's character. Usually he was careless and leisurely, not paying much attention to anything, but once he cared about something, he would fight to the death for it. And Wu Yu's cultivation base, while it wasn't particularly high, by some odd twist of fate nobody was able to match him in skill. Even himself and Bai Hu wouldn't be able to subdue Wu Yu. Ultimately, Heshi couldn't do anything about his pestering and withdrew another box of food from her space. As she threw it at him, she coldly said, "Just this once, never to be repeated." Wu Yu caught the box of food. Breathing deeply, a rich fragrance assailed his nostrils, and immediately his eyes shined brilliantly, making him look like a child eager to devour the entire box of food. Chapter 178, Let them get used to it. First Heshi helplessly shook her head, hearing Dandan's protesting voice as it said, "What, mother doesn't love Dandan? It won't matter if you give the delicious food to the big brother that you play kissing with, but why did you also give it to other people?" Obviously that was Dandan's. What, mother doesn't love Dandan anymore? What is this brat talking about? Qing Long soon brought Heshi to the water pavilion. At this moment, the fire crystal in the water pavilion had been removed, and surrounded by ventilation, with the wind blowing and causing the gauze to flutter, it seemed cool and comfortable inside. Heshi had barely entered the water pavilion when she noticed Nangong Yu sitting by the bedside, wearing only a white satin robe. Half of his long hair was draped over a shoulder, while the other half was tied up with a silver-braided tassel rope. Watching him from the side, she could only see the high and straight bridge of his nose, refined and handsome facial features, and his transparently pale complexion. He and Qing Long had obviously entered the room, but it seemed as if Nan Gongyu was completely unaware. With his slightly drooping long and thick eyelashes, his whole countenance appeared weak yet beautiful. Abruptly, a trace of indescribable pain was felt in Heshi's heart. She didn't like seeing this man looking so frail. He should be high-spirited and overbearing. Yet in order to save her, he had now become so weak. Heshi gently knocked on the door. It was only then that Nan Gongyu turned his head, and seeing that it was Heshi, his cold countenance very quickly melted into one of a gentle and soft smile. "You've come." His tone was flat and nothing special, but it contained deep happiness and expectation, making Heshi's heart beat wildly in her chest. Composing herself, she walked forward while carrying the box of food. Soon, one of the servants that served in the water pavilion walked over to take the box of food, arranging everything in it on the table. When the smell of the food spread throughout the room, no matter how trained these servants were, they couldn't help but take deep breaths in. Swallowing the saliva pooling in their mouths, they restrained the longing on their faces with difficulty. Because the people of this world were unaware of the existence of seasoning, many people that ate spiritual foods were only concerned about its spiritual energy, and at most, they only ate sweet and salty things. So when they ate Heshi's specially cooked food, they simply didn't dare to believe that food could ever have such a great taste. That's right. Ever since Nan Gongyu had eaten Heshi's food at her home, he had began to ask her for packages of food without any sense of shame. And so, the people in Hell King Manor were now more or less experienced with something called delicious food. Even though they weren't able to taste it, just seeing the color, smell, and spiritual concentration, coupled with Baihu's high praises, they knew that the food was of the highest quality. And when they were cleaning up the dishes, their fingertips would be stained with sauce, causing them to feel extremely hungry. Alas, if only Princess would marry into Hell King Manor, she could then teach at least 1/10 of her cooking skills to the manor's kitchen. It would be great. "Prince and Princess, please enjoy the meal." Heshi all of a sudden returned to her senses, the word princess echoing loud and clear in her ears. She couldn't help but say to Nan Gongyu with a low voice, "Since when did I become your princess? You should make it clear to your subordinates, tell them to not call me princess again. Later on, they can just call me Shiyu." Nan Gongyu used his chopsticks to carry some food into his mouth, and while enjoying its fragrance and taste, he laughed lightly. "Since Xi'er will be my princess sooner or later, is it wrong to let them call you that earlier? It's good to let them get used to it first." Chapter 179, Compensation. Heshi's mouth twitched as she said, "Who says I will become your princess sooner or later?" Nan Gongyu raised his eyebrows. "You don't want to?" Heshi glared at him. "We've barely known each other for a month, right? We've known each other for a month, but we've embraced, as well as kissed. Xi'er, we already have such a close relationship, yet you have the heart to say that we're only strangers?" Heshi's forehead filled with black lines. What is he talking about, embracing and kissing? Clearly I was being forced. Nan Gongyu leaned closer to her ear and asked, "Xi'er, are you unwilling to become my princess, to become my legitimate wife?" The man's warm breath fanned against her ear, and with his exquisite face so close to her, Heshi could feel her heart jumping in her chest and her face slightly blushing. "This isn't a problem of being unwilling or not," Nan Gongyu immediately beamed with joy. "Ooh, then it means you want to." "Since Xi'er is willing, then the rest isn't a problem. I'm very happy that we agree." "Who's agreeing with your opinion?" Heshi's long shapely brows frowned due to her anger. Since when did this man become a scoundrel? Clearly the first time she met him he had the manner of a ruthless and handsome tyrant. Nan Gongyu swiftly switched positions, moving closer to where Heshi was sitting. He then gently placed his hands on her slender waist. "All right, my princess, now can you accompany me to eat? You see, I've had your dishes specially lined up for you, yet you haven't touched any at all. Are you ignoring me?" When the watching servants saw their master's completely peaceful countenance, totally opposite to his usual behavior, their eyes widened till they nearly popped out. They gazed at Heshi like they were seeing a rare creature. Princess indeed is the princess. They had never seen their master pamper and act so lovingly to anyone like this before. Heshi could feel herself being watched by the servants, causing her ears to turn red. Casting an angry glare at Nan Gongyu, she said, "Get your hands off." "No," Nan Gongyu replied, like it was only to be expected that he could touch Heshi. "Princess and I will be eating like this in the future. We have no need for you to serve us, you can all withdraw for now." The servants heard the order and promptly complied. With them hurriedly retreating, soon, only Heshi and Nan Gongyu were left in the room. Nan Gongyu said, "This way, no one will disturb us." "Shi-er, you don't need to be shy anymore." "Who is shy?" "You're shy, your whole family is shy." Heshi was fuming, she really wanted to kick this shameless man. Nan Gongyu immediately changed his tone to one of grief. "Shi-er, we clearly came to an agreement yesterday, and I wanted to see you as soon as I opened my eyes. I've been waiting for you since early this morning, shouldn't you compensate me?" Heshi recalled that scene from before she left yesterday, and she couldn't help but blush. "Who told you to wake up so early?" "Don't tell me that because you might wake up in the middle of the night, I also have to keep watch over you at all times." "That's a good idea," Nan Gongyu's eyes lit up. "Indeed, you're my princess, living in this manner with me is only proper." "Someone come," Heshi anxiously covered his mouth. "What are you doing?" Nan Gongyu grabbed her small hand, and holding it in his palm, he innocently said, "Ordering my people to arrange a room for you." "Ah, arranging one beside my bedroom would be good, or perhaps, you would prefer to share the same bed with me, Shi-er?" "That's exactly what this king has been waiting for." Heshi noticed that he was becoming more and more outrageous, and quickly interrupted him. "Enough. What crazy things are you thinking about so early in the morning? Hurry up and let me go." Nan Gongyu not only didn't let her go, instead, he encircled her waist with his arms, tugging her closer to him. "I can let go, but I've been waiting since early this morning. So Shi-er, you must compensate me." Chapter 180, Men and Women Shouldn't Touch, What Compensation Do You Want? "Give me a kiss." Heshi's mouth twitched. "Dream on, didn't you ever hear that men and women shouldn't touch? Men and women not touching only refers to people that are unrelated, right?" Nan Gongyu smiled as he said, "You're this king's wife, how can it be possible that we aren't related? Not to mention, we've already kissed and embraced." As he said this, he leaned forward and brought his face closer with an expression of, "I'm ready," on it. Heshi wanted to laugh at his shameless. She really didn't know if this was his true character, or if it was because his illness had muddled his brain. "Who is related to you? Stop imagining your love is reciprocated and showering your affection on an uninterested party. I'm not interested in you." Nan Gongyu faintly laughed. He wasn't the slightest bit angry, instead, he only flicked the tip of her small and exquisite nose. Hypocritical girl. "All right, if you won't kiss me, then I'll suffer loss and kiss you instead." Finished speaking, he held Heshi closer, leaning in to kiss her cherry red lips. In response, Heshi pushed him away as she dodged, but who would have thought that once she pushed him, Nan Gongyu would fall from his chair. And as he fell, his head knocked against the corner of a table, causing a loud bang to echo throughout the room. Heshi was stunned. She hadn't expected that the usually strong and overbearing Nan Gongyu would fall with only one push. In fact, she had actually forgotten that her cultivation base was on the 8th rank of foundation establishment stage, while Nan Gongyu's body had been suffering for the last 3 days, causing his strength to be limited. When Qing Long heard the loud noise from his position outside the room, he worriedly pushed the door open. Glancing around the room, he noticed his master was unconscious on the ground, while Heshi was standing still with a look of bewilderment on her face. With such a scene before him, Qinglong had suspicions as to what might have happened, but even if he wasn't sure, he was angered to think that Heshi would unexpectedly cause his master to once again sustain an injury and lose consciousness. Thinking till here, his body immediately burst with cold power. You only came here to examine Master's condition, right? No matter how much Master provoked or irritated you, was it enough for you to toss him aside? Don't forget, Master is only in this condition right now because he saved you. Qinglong had always been habitually silent. This was the first time that he had become so mad he would start shouting out of control. For them, Master's safety was the most important thing. But Qinglong had barely finished scolding Heshi when he bowed his head, his gaze meeting his master's serene and deep eyes. The emotion in his eyes flashed with a cold light, clearly projecting the words, "My princess is someone you can scold? Are you courting death?" Qinglong felt the veins on his forehead twitch, cold sweat immediately sliding down his back. The next moment, he could feel his 3 views, 1, cracking, no. His 3 views had started cracking ever since his master had first met Miss Naylan. He never could have thought that his master would be willing to beat him to death over a woman. However, Heshi was unaware of the secret communication happening between the two. Qinglong's snarls had made Heshi become distraught with anxiety, and quickly walking forward, she went to examine Nangong Yu's condition. At this moment, Qinglong tactfully moved over for Heshi, purposely helping his master to adjust his position and allowing him to be able to lean closely on Heshi's bosom. His job as Hell King's personal servant really isn't an easy one. Heshi held Nangong Yu's hand and began to examine him. Yet the more she probed for his pulse, the more anxious she became. There were no wounds on Nangong Yu's body, but his breathing was becoming extremely weak, his pulse erratic, and his veins were weakening. Heshi was flustered, and although she didn't want to admit it, at this moment, she was really very worried about this man. She was so flustered that it mixed with fear that he really would leave her. It was so bad that even though she was trying to treat Nangong Yu, she was no longer able to maintain her usual calmness. 1 literally means 3 views and most commonly refers to one's view of the world, life, and values. Chapter 181, You Deceived Me. From her space Heshi took out a set of silver needles, and tearing open Nangong Yu's clothes, she revealed the muscles on his strong chest. Her small warm hands lightly touched the acupuncture points on his chest, inserting a series of needles in his heart veins. Suddenly, she heard Nangong Yu's deep and low voice in her ears. I didn't know that Xier is such a kind person. Heshi stared blankly, and suddenly lifting her head, she saw a loving smile upon Nangong Yu's face. Although his complexion was still pale, his eyes were bright with emotion. Wasn't he unconscious and dying just moments before? You deceived me. Heshi glared at him in disbelief, her eyebrows frowning. This scoundrel. Just moments ago she had been worrying in vain, and yet he had even gone so far as to make his pulse unsteady. This hateful man had actually deceived her. Heshi stood up with a cold expression on her face, and turned around to leave. Nangong Yu pulled on her hand to stop her. Xier, don't go. Originally, if Heshi had wanted to shake off his hand, it would be very easy, but Nangong Yu had unexpectedly used the small amount of spiritual power that remained within his body. He had so little spiritual power left that his hand was icy cold, the life force within his body becoming extremely faint. You're crazy. Quickly stop using your spiritual power and let me go. Do you want to die? No, not unless Xier promises me that you won't go. Heshi's face revealed her anxiousness, and afraid that if he continued it really would become life-threatening, she promptly said, okay. I won't go. With this, Nangong Yu finally released her hand, the trace of a shallow and weak smile at the corners of his mouth. Xier, is it that difficult for you to admit that you have feelings for me? Finished speaking, his eyes closed, and this time he really did lose consciousness. Heshi remained standing in place, staring blankly at Nangong Yu's sleeping face. When the expression on his face remained unchanged, she finally released a long sigh. Although Heshi was angry that Nan Gongyu had lied to her, she also knew his current state wasn't too optimistic, so she had to pay attention and save his life first. She got Qing Long to prepare a room full of hot fire crystals containing spiritual power, prepare a wooden tub filled with hot water, and arranged the treatment room like yesterday. The medicine this time, compared to a few days ago, was a bit different. Originally Nan Gongyu had no longer needed to increase the amount of medicine, so Heshi had agreed to let old Xiu make it. However, Hu told Nan Gongyu to court disaster by using his spiritual power. Without any choice, she removed a porcelain bottle from her space, pouring 1/3 of the medicine that she had just made not long ago into the bath. This porcelain bottle is something of little value or interest compared to a magical tool, and she herself didn't know where she got it from. It was only able to hold a very limited quantity of solid items, yet it could contain several tons of liquid. The medicinal liquid inside was prepared by Heshi in her space last night, during her free time. It used an extract from the spiritual herbs that Dandan had brought back to life by planting, then it was mixed with water from the 9th secluded spirit spring, and the resulting medicine was 1,000 times more potent than yesterday's. But an ordinary martial artist's body wouldn't be able to bear it, so originally Heshi hadn't intended to use it. Under Heshi's guidance, Qing Long placed Nan Gongyu into the medicinal bath. Then from the side, he watched as Heshi took out her silver needles, and one by one, inserted them into several of Nan Gongyu's major acupuncture points. After the silver needles had been placed on Nan Gongyu, smoke began to rise from his body. The room that had at first been sweltering, now started to drop in temperature due to the smoke. This was because the cold poison within Nan Gongyu's body was now being forcefully released. Heshi handed the porcelain bottle in her grip to Qing Long. Once the color of the medicinal liquid in the tub has faded, change the water, and pour in more of the medicine in this bottle. Continue this for up to 3 days, and Nan Gongyu will be able to recover. Qing Long received the medicinal bottle, and quickly said, "Princess, Master's current state is unstable. I hope that until Master awakens, you can stay here." Chapter 182, Learning to Refine Pills. He was afraid that when Master woke up and didn't see Princess, that he would be beaten to death by Master. Heshi saw Qing Long's expression, and right away she knew that leaving would be impossible. Besides, it was because of her that Nan Gongyu was in his current situation, and she had also promised him that she wouldn't leave, so she should stay. Heshi pondered a moment before speaking. "Do you have a refining room here?" "There is." "Princess, the reason you're asking for a refining room is to..." "Didn't Princess say she couldn't refine?" Heshi said, "Bring me there. This time I will stay in the refining room. If there is something the matter, you can find me there at any time." Qing Long was puzzled, but he still bowed in agreement. As long as Princess agreed to stay, it didn't matter what she wanted to do, even if it was tearing down Hell King Manor. Hell King Manor's refining room was top of the line, complete with every kind of tool anyone would ever need. The room was about 20 square meters, with many runes engraved on the walls to help gather spiritual power. In the corner of the room there was an arrangement of shelves. These shelves were made using special materials. Spiritual plants or spiritual beast cores could be placed on top of them and the spiritual energy wouldn't drain away. In the center of the room there was a gray refining furnace, probably as tall as a person, and shaped with a 3-foot round belly. The surface of the furnace was engraved with all kinds of talismans. In the overflowing cauldron pill scripture, she had read that these talismans were special spells used to help gather spiritual power, greatly increasing the success while refining pills. The higher the level of the furnace, the more useful and complex the talismans would be. Arranged around the furnace were several mats, and against one wall there was a long table and a simple bed. These were to be used midway through refining if the person needed to rest. When Heshi arrived at Hell King Manor she had had a plan, and now she was eager to learn the refining techniques written in the overflowing cauldron pill scripture. Unfortunately, it was too inconvenient to do it in her courtyard, and plus, she didn't have a refining furnace. So since she was here anyway, she came up with the idea of borrowing Hell King Manor's refining room. In accordance with the directions written in the overflowing cauldron pill scripture, Hashi began to slowly use her spiritual power. Focusing on fire's spiritual power, she slowly condensed it as much as she could, until it finally formed a ball of golden spiritual fire on her fingertips. As soon as the spiritual fire entered the refining furnace, the spells used to gather spiritual power around the furnace began to slowly ignite, gradually lighting up the whole furnace. Hashi wiped the sweat on her forehead, feeling that the single action of forming the spiritual fire had drained almost all of her spiritual power. To help replenish it, she drank a big bottle of spring water. Thinking of how much time and spiritual power went into just being able to condense a ball of spiritual fire, Hashi became anxious. With this little ball of spiritual fire, she would only be able to refine a small amount of pills, and she estimated that they would be second-grade pills at most. However, what Hashi didn't know was that if other doctors could see her actions, their eyeballs would pop out from shock. For a martial artist to achieve condensing a ball of spiritual fire for refining, they would have to at least be gold core stage. For an ordinary martial artist to be able to refine pills, they generally borrowed spiritual fire sources from nature. Yet Hashi, who was currently only at foundation establishment stage, was able to accomplish forming spiritual fire. And not only that, her spiritual fire wasn't the normal dark reddish-brown color, rather, it was a high-rank light golden color. This was simply against Mi Luo continent's advanced refining principles. Unfortunately, Hashi was unaware of this, as all of her knowledge on refining pills was coming from the overflowing cauldron pill scripture that old man Shumi had left. What was instructed inside was naturally what she practiced. How would she know that it was universally shocking? And so after replenishing her spiritual power, Hashi took out the spiritual herbs from her space that she had prepared in advance according to requirement. Then, she wrapped them in a layer of her spiritual power, and threw them into the furnace. Chapter 183, Refining a Supplement Spiritual Pill. Because of the spiritual power, the spiritual herbs placed in the furnace were engulfed by the spiritual fire in an instant. This prescription was for the simplest supplement spiritual pill. It was listed as a first-rank medicinal pill, and was the best type for Hashi to practice refining. Gathering her spiritual energy, she opened her spiritual eyes. Using them to then examine what was occurring inside the furnace, she discovered that the spiritual herbs had already begun to slowly mix with the spiritual fire. Unfortunately, they weren't mixing well. Some areas had already melted, while certain areas of the spiritual herbs were untouched. However, if this were to continue, then wouldn't this affect the attributes of the medicinal pill? But if she was able to stir it, then wouldn't it be just like when she decocts her herbal medicine? Thinking this, she focused, and driving her spiritual power into the boiling furnace, she wrapped up the spiritual herbs, and continuously stirred the remaining herbs slowly. And when the spiritual fire wasn't strong enough in some places, she used her divine sense to split her spiritual power. Dividing it into strands, she then poured it into the spiritual fire so that the herbs were able to cook evenly. This is like when you lit a fire for cooking. When the fire wasn't big enough, that's when you added more firewood. Hashi felt that this was very simple reasoning, yet this kind of technique wasn't written in the overflowing cauldron pill scripture. However, she thought that perhaps the techniques documented were the only ones ancient doctors could think of to refine medicinal pills. Yet what Hashi didn't know was that this small action would greatly change this batch of medicinal pills' attributes, causing her to be very surprised. After an hour passed, Hashi discovered that the herbs inside had dissolved completely. So after wiping off the sweat on her forehead, she replenished herself by drinking a bit of spring water. She estimated that with this speed, it would take about 2 to 4 hours to complete, eliminating her chances of success. Fortunately, the furnace and the room was filled with strong spells used to help gather spiritual power, greatly reducing the consumption of Hashi's own. Otherwise, if Hashi had to use her spiritual power for a few hours in a row, even if she continuously drank spring water, she still wouldn't be able to maintain that pace. Once another 2 hours had passed, all the spiritual herbs had finally finished fusing, and above the gray furnace a dazzling golden light burst forth. He opened the furnace and a medicinal smell straight away assailed her nostrils, making her feel clear-headed and relaxed. At this moment in the furnace's second layer, there lay a small, finger-sized gray-black medicinal pill. The difference between this supplement's spiritual pill and others is that on this gray-black medicinal pill there were thin golden lines. And although they were very faint, they were still visible if you looked carefully. 30 supplements spiritual pills, He sighed. After refining for 4 hours, the result was only 30 supplements spiritual pills. With such demanding work on her mind and body, this was all she had to show for it. If word of this were to reach the ears of other refining masters, their spluttering would be able to drown He. After refining for the first time and using the most common spiritual herbs, if a furnace producing 30 pills still wasn't enough, then how would that group of people have lived? But when He worked out the cost of the supplement's spiritual pills materials and compared it to how much she could sell the pills for, she immediately beamed with joy. Adding up the cost to produce the spiritual herbs for the supplement's spiritual pills, it equaled no more than 10 crystals. So how much were the completed supplement spiritual pills worth? One low-grade supplement spiritual pill would be worth more than 100 crystals, while just one top-grade pill could fetch more than 1,000 crystals. When looking at it this way, spending 4 hours on making them was totally worth it. 3 days passed very quickly. Throughout this time, He studied the overflowing cauldron pill scripture and practiced refining during the day, while during the evenings, she would meditate in her space and cultivate. Now that 3 days had passed, all the porcelain bottles that she found in her space had already been filled with medicinal pills, and once those were filled, she even managed to find a large jar to store the medicinal pills in. Then, she placed them all inside the Spirit Firmament Palace. Chapter 184, You're Awake. In any case, the Spirit Firmament Palace has the effect of protecting the freshness of stored items. No matter what was placed inside, when it's removed, it will still be exactly the same as when it was originally stored. He had now refined a lot of medicinal pills. Unfortunately, all of them were only first-grade pills. When she had attempted to refine second-grade medicinal pills, she ultimately failed due to a variety of reasons. There was a note written in the overflowing cauldron pill scripture mentioning that the intensity, and the rank, of the spiritual fire would affect the grade of the medicinal pill. So even though she wanted to refine a second-grade medicinal pill, it apparently seemed that the rank of her spiritual fire wasn't high enough, leading to any attempts failing. However, He's failed medicinal pills were different compared to other refining masters' failures. Their failed attempts at refining would end with the medicinal pills crumbling into powder, and the entire furnace exploding. Yet when He's attempt at refining second-grade medicinal pills failed, small round pills still formed. Compared to normal second-grade supplement spiritual pills, these were a little smaller and darker. He thought for a moment, then she decided to store the failed pills away and research the cause of the failure at a later date. During this period of time, He of course still went to check on Nan Gongyu's condition. While he had continuously slept for all 3 days, He had continued Nan Gongyu's treatment of medicinal baths, plus other treatments. And to avoid him being angry, she had continuously drugged him into unconsciousness for those 3 days, stopping his treatments only yesterday. The results of the treatment were better than expected, as sure enough, Nan Gongyu's body had become stronger than before. So although the effects of He's medicinal treatment was very powerful, to ordinary martial artists, they would find themselves devoured instead of healed. Yet Nan Gongyu's body had unexpectedly been able to adapt, easily passing through 3 days of treatment. On top of that, the cold poison in his body had dispersed, letting the spiritual power once again circulate in his dantian. Even the injuries he'd previously received in the flame cave were gradually recovering. It can be said that until today, Nan Gongyu had already completely recovered. But now that he had regained the peak phase of his cultivation base, until the next time the cold poison attacked, he wouldn't need to worry about it. Right now He stood behind Nan Gongyu and began to remove all of the silver needles from his body. The moment the last silver needle was pulled out, Nan Gongyu's eyes abruptly opened. He had just happened to move in front of Nan Gongyu, when she suddenly came into contact with a pair of beast-like eyes. Luminous and fiery, they gazed into her eyes, causing her to momentarily stare blankly. "You're awake." Being stared at with such a piercing stare, He didn't know why her heart started to grow apprehensive. It was as if she was his prey, instinctively making her want to escape. "Then, since you're fine, I'll go back." Finished speaking, she replaced the silver needles in her space and turned around to run away. However, before she was even able to turn around, her wrist was gripped tightly by a certain man. The big palm that held her back no longer felt as cold as ice, rather, it was scorching hot, like burning charcoal. Fine beads of sweat formed on He's forehead. "Stop it, what are you doing?" He hadn't yet finished speaking when her body suddenly rose into the air, and since she completely lacked the strength to resist, she was dragged into the medicinal tub. Due to the surprise, He cried out in alarm and felt herself drink a mouthful of bitter medicinal water in the process, causing her small face to pucker up as she repeatedly coughed. "You're crazy. Do you want me to choke to death?" Finished speaking, she used one hand to support herself on the edge of tub while she jumped out. Unfortunately, before she could escape, Nan Gongyu pushed down on her shoulder with one hand. Then, gently pulling her back, he trapped her between himself and the tub wall. "Naughty little thing, choking to death is too cheap for you." He was intimidated by his burning gaze, and because of their ambiguous position, their bodies sticking closely to each other, she could feel her face turning red. Using both hands, she pushed on Nan Gongyu's chest to create some distance, her face taut with the effort she was exerting as she said, "What are you talking about? I don't understand." Chapter 185, Punishment. Nan Gongyu smiled evilly, and leaning closer to her, he blew a breath into her ear as he said, "You don't understand? Then wouldn't it better if I helped you to remember? Let's say you first pushed me, making me lose consciousness, and then you even dared to add a knockout drug into my medicine. Your courage is really growing." Hearing what he said, He's face immediately reddened. Her guilty conscience making her turn her face to the side. "Stop talking nonsense. You fainting is your own fault, I already told you not to use your spiritual power. And what knockout drug, do you have any evidence?" After saying this, she firmly pushed against the man who trapped her, wanting to slip away. But since Nan Gongyu's cultivation base had now recovered, she was unable to move him. Her action of pushing him was ineffective, instead, it only made Nan Gongyu tighten his hold on her. She suddenly wanted to smash a stone down on her foot in depression. Had she cured Nan Gongyu only for him to act undisciplined and suppress her? Nan Gongyu quietly laughed, his muscled chest faintly vibrating. "Tell me, how should I punish you? It's me who cured you, He hadn't yet finished speaking when Nan Gongyu lowered his head, firmly sealing her small alluring lips. With heated palms, he clasped one closely around He's waist, while the other pressed against her head, firmly confining her in his arms. Once the kiss ended, He felt limp all over, completely pliable in Nan Gongyu's embrace. Nan Gongyu's arms encircled her entire body, and lifting up her petite frame, he bent her legs and placed her on his lap. He's translucent cheeks were glowing a peach-like crimson, while her eyes were like black glass, filled with a trace of moisture and a faint purple light. Her small red lips were slightly parted as she gasped for breath, revealing her pink tongue and pearly white teeth. Nan Gongyu felt his heart tighten, and holding her a little higher, he couldn't help but kiss her once more. This time, the kiss lasted until He was almost faint from a lack of air. At some point her arms had subconsciously wrapped themselves around Nan Gongyu's neck, it seemed as if her whole body was on the verge of melting. Nan Gongyu's eyes were flooded with strong passion, and as he lowered his gaze to the girl's captivating black-purple eyes, he could feel the heat in his body surge to somewhere in his lower regions. If you seduce me like this again, I certainly won't be able to restrain myself and will make you my princess right now." The man's deep and husky voice contained a strong desire, making it feel like he wanted to swallow her entirely. His ink-black eyes had become a scorching red as they intently stared at her. He suddenly returned to her senses, realizing that the two of them were tightly pressed against each other. And since she was sitting on his lap, she could definitely feel the changes occurring with Nan Gongyu's body. You pervert. Shameless. He immediately jumped from his lap, retreating to the other side of the tub. Nan Gongyu laughed. Aha, I'm shameless, but I'm only shameless to my family's Shi'er. Pfft. Who's your family? He absolutely wouldn't admit that there was a trace of happiness in her heart. Nan Gongyu moved, suddenly appearing beside He and pulling her into his embrace. Shi'er, don't avoid me, all right? You can't run away, you're destined to be mine. He angrily retorted, why am I yours? You're more or less mine, don't forget that you now owe me a favor for saving your life. Once the words were out, He immediately regretted it so much that her intestines were green. Isn't this the same as giving this shameless guy an opportunity? Chapter 186, Forgive my clumsy eyes. It was all because of this scoundrel making her angry, it was his fault that her IQ had decreased. Sure enough, when Nan Gongyu heard her words, he lowered his head and kissed one of her red earlobes. What Shi'er said is right. I'm yours for as long as you want, I'm your man. He was just about to retort, when Qing Long's nervous voice suddenly sounded from outside. Master, Ice Lotus Fairy has come to pay a visit. Qing Long knew that his master was currently together with Miss Naylan, so whoever dared to disturb them must be prepared to be skinned alive. However, the person who came is Ice Lotus Fairy, so he had no choice but to inform master. Nan Gongyu looked at He, pondering for a moment before he said, I'm occupied at the moment, let her wait a while. Qing Long peeked inside the room from a crack in the door, and sure enough, what occupied at the moment, is it taking a bath together with Miss Naylan? Qing Long silently scoffed, yet on the surface he still answered respectfully. Yes, master. Just as he was about to leave, he heard He's distinct voice from inside the room. She doesn't need to wait, he has time now. As He finished speaking, she pushed Nan Gongyu away while glaring at him, then turned around and pulled herself out of the medicinal tub. He was able to use her spiritual power to quickly dry the clothes on her body. Unfortunately, yellow stains were clearly visible, while there was still a distinct smell of medicine. And although her clothes were now unsightly, she was unable to do anything about it as she didn't have any spare clothes to change into. Fortunately, she was currently wearing men's clothes, so even if she was dressed somewhat sloppily, it wouldn't cause people to pay attention to her on the streets. Once He finished straightening her clothes as much as she could, without bidding farewell, she pulled open the door and rapidly fled the room. The distinct sound of Nan Gongyu's bright laughter could be heard echoing behind He, causing her to gnash her teeth. Qing Long had thought that he was used to seeing the interactions between his master and Miss Naylan, yet watching this scene, he became shocked and bewildered. What had master been doing with Miss Naylan for him to reveal such a rarely seen expression? He accelerated as she fled through the courtyard, continuously using one hand to smooth out the wrinkles on her clothes. While she was passing through the courtyard, a group of people were heading towards her. He didn't want to be delayed in Hell King Manor again, and moreover, she obviously didn't know who these people were, so she intended to just ignore them and leave. Yet just when she had turned around to go down another small path, she heard a tender voice shout, "Stop!" She stopped, and looking over, she saw a delicate and beautiful woman dressed in purple separate herself from the group of people. Placing one hand on her hips, she used her other hand to point at He as she angrily said, "How can you work in Hell King Manor when you don't even know to pay your respects to my young miss when you see her?" He narrowed her eyes and coldly said, "Who told you that I work in Hell King Manor?" As He spoke, everyone's attention was suddenly drawn to her face, and once they clearly saw her appearance, they couldn't help but gasp. This youngster was dressed in old and wrinkled robes, and there was only the smallest amount of spiritual power fluctuations coming from his body. But unexpectedly, his features were so radiant and beautiful, especially his eyes. They were like bright and cold gems, sparkling and translucent. They were piercing with their gaze. Because of Heshi's outstanding features, the woman dressed in purple was stunned and forgot how to momentarily speak. But detecting that Heshi's cultivation base was only chi refining stage, disdain was immediately visible in her eyes. You're merely a rude boy who's an insignificant chi refining stage martial artist. Even if you're not one of Hell King Manor's people, if you're able to enter and exit here, you ought to know that my young Mrs. status in Hell King Manor is special. It's only natural that you should pay your respects to my young miss. Heshi simply wanted to laugh when she heard this woman's annoying and stupid words. Crossing her arms in front her chest, Heshi coldly looked at the woman. Who's your young miss? Forgive my clumsy eyes, but I don't see any important person here that deserves my respect. Chapter 187, Ice Lotus Fairy. The woman dressed in purple furiously said, my young miss comes from the Feng family. She's the young clan head of the Luli sect, known as the Ice Lotus Fairy. Country bumpkin, don't say that you don't know that Luli sect is one of the 4 greatest sects in Mi Luo continent. Even here in Hell King Manor, Qing Long, Bai Hu, and the others must respectfully salute my young miss when they see her. It's an honor that a no-name rude boy such as yourself is able to appear in front of my young miss, yet you actually don't know the difference between good and bad. Heshi slightly narrowed her eyes. She despised it the most when people had such an arrogant manner when speaking to her. If you like to kneel and lick the boots of others, that's your choice. It would be better if you didn't provoke me. The woman dressed in purple didn't expect that after she had explained that this young man would unexpectedly not only not express any fear, his manner would instead become more unrestrained. She couldn't help but be furious as she said, you know, my young miss not only has an exquisite appearance, she will also be the future princess of Hell King Manor. Since you dare to be rude to my young miss in Hell King Manor, are you not afraid of His Highness Hell King cutting you two into 8 pieces? The future princess of Hell King Manor. A sharp coldness flashed in Heshi's eyes, while her heart felt like it was being scratched by something. Anger and annoyance surged forth from her chest, making her want to commit murder. But on the surface she only exposed an indifferent smile. So, as it turns out, it's the future princess, but even if it's Hell King's princess, what does that have to do with me? I'm not one of the people from Hell King Manor. Finished speaking, she turned around to leave. Anger flashed across the face of the woman dressed in purple, causing her complexion to turn an unsightly shade of red, while her body violently trembled. With a swish, she pulled out a long sword, and using the approximate force of a meridian stage martial artist, she rushed towards Heshi to stab her. Heshi's eyes narrowed slightly, and seeing the sharp long sword flashing coldly in the sunlight as it headed straight towards her, a corner of her mouth rose in a smirk. Ziyan, don't be rude. Just as the long sword was about to reach Heshi, a crisp and gentle voice could be heard softly scolding in an imposing manner. Immediately, the long sword headed for Heshi was like a kite with its string tugged. Stopping in mid-air, it soon after floated back to the woman dressed in purple. Ziyan gripped the long sword in her hand, stomping her foot as she said, young miss, this rude boy was extremely disrespectful towards you, how can you let him off without teaching him a lesson? Ziyan's eyes gazed at the crowd, and it was at this moment that it parted. A woman wearing a long white muslin skirt slowly separated herself from the huddle of people. When Heshi saw this woman, she felt like there was something glaringly bright before her eyes. Her appearance was elegant and refined, and with a slender and graceful figure, it seemed like she was so attractive that she didn't belong to the mortal realm, especially with her graceful and noble aura. It made her resemble a flower on a high mountain, too far away to be disrespected and played with. While Heshi was sizing up the woman dressed in white, the other party was also examining her. Studying Heshi's exquisite and elegant face that looked like it was crafted by the heavens, the eyes of the woman dressed in white flashed with a trace of darkness. But, when Heshi realized that the woman had only glanced at her for a moment before turning away and dismissing her, Heshi felt like she was just a jumping clown, unworthy of the woman's attention. This kind of arrogance made Heshi very uncomfortable. Young miss, just let me teach this rude boy a proper lesson, okay? Ziyan moved to Ice Lotus Fairy's side, half to appeal, and half to act coquettishly. Suddenly, a graceful and arrogant smile appeared on Ice Lotus Fairy's face. Ziyan, when all is said and done, we're currently in Hell King Manor. Even if you want to teach this rude boy a lesson, it should be up to Hell King Manor's people to undertake it, isn't that right, brother you? Chapter 188, an exceptionally pleasing pair of jade annulus. Hearing this, Ziyan raised her head, and sure enough, there was Hell King. With Nangong Yu's tall, handsome, and straight figure before them, she immediately became overjoyed and said, "Miss, sure enough, Hell King personally came to welcome you. Only you are lucky enough to receive this privileged treatment." When Ziyan said this, she purposely raised her voice, not forgetting to occasionally throw contempt-filled looks at Heshi. She did this like she was informing Heshi of the offense she had committed towards a respected person. A corner of Heshi's mouth raised as she noticed that Ice Lotus Fairy had already stepped forward, her beautiful eyes filled with worry as she looked at Nangong Yu. "Brother Yu, I heard that you were sick, are you feeling better now?" The moment Nangong Yu saw Ice Lotus Fairy, the expression in his eyes was no longer indifferent, even his tone became slightly gentler. "Lianing, why did you come here?" Ice Lotus Fairy took out a porcelain bottle as she said, "Eldest brother wanted to discuss something with you, and since I was worried about your health, I volunteered to help him by coming over with the information myself. This is medicine that was personally refined by my master, I think this'll certainly be useful for you." Nangong Yu didn't receive it, rather, his fathomless eyes glanced towards Heshi. "No need, I have my personal doctor. Although Zhu Kei's medical expertise is excellent, it can't compare to my master's. Brother Yu, it's better that you accept this medicine, don't let Xian Air worry about you 1,000 miles away." "It's not Zhu Kei," Nangong Yu sneered faintly. Yet when he saw the pitiful way Ice Lotus Fairy was looking at him, he gave in and accepted the bottle of medicine. But his stare stayed on Heshi the whole time as she stood not too far away, and he explained, "My personal doctor's skills are extremely outstanding. Lianing, in the future you don't have to worry me." Ice Lotus Fairy followed Nangong Yu's gaze, the arrogant and rude boy's figure entering her sight. She frowned slightly. This youngster's cultivation base is only chi refining stage, so how could he be a doctor? "Brother Yu, is this your new attending medical doctor?" Doctor and attending medical doctor, although there was only an additional 2 words, their positions were as different as heaven and earth. Attending medical doctors normally had a low cultivation base, and could usually only do unskilled work, such as nursing. They weren't proficient in the fields of refining and treatment, so therefore their status was naturally not high at all. Large common households who couldn't afford a high-rank doctor, would instead hire an attending medical doctor to ensure the health of their family. Ice Lotus Fairy examined Heshi's cultivation base, and upon discovering that she was just a mere chi refining stage martial artist, she naturally suspected that Heshi was just an attending medical doctor. Hearing what was said, Nangong Yu laughed quietly, then helplessly said, "An attending medical doctor? I wouldn't trust one. Not to mention, which attending medical doctor would dare to not give their master face?" When the Ice Lotus Fairy heard the loving tone in Nangong Yu's voice, her graceful eyebrows wrinkled. This was the first time that she had heard Brother Yu speaking in this tone. Standing at a distance, Heshi watched the 2 people looking at her expectantly and talking softly. Her face was calm and tranquil, completely unmoving. However, her eyes flooded with a cold light. With such a distance, if she were to use her internal energy to eavesdrop, it wouldn't be difficult to understand the content of their dialogue. However, she didn't want to, because this had nothing to do with her. She had originally wanted to distance herself from Nangong Yu, wanting to clearly distinguish the gratitude and resentment between the 2 of them, helping them to having nothing to do with each other. Now that she knew he had a future princess, wasn't that good? Watching from a distance, the 2 people were picturesque between the shady trees and blossoming flowers. They resembled a pair of jade annulus, exceptionally attractive. Ziyan's voice suddenly interrupted from the side, filled with pleased laughter. Boy, do you see it now? His Highness Hell King never lets other people get close easily, but our young miss is an exception. In all of Hell King Manor, who doesn't know that my young miss will become Hell King's future princess? How is it, aren't His Highness Hell King and my young miss very well matched? Chapter 189, Why Are You Mad? He indifferently said, Indeed, they're well matched. Hearing this, the smile on Ziyan's face became proud and arrogant. That's good if you know. My young miss's status, how can you such a lowly person like yourself neglect it? Don't think that just because you can enter and exit Hell King Manor that you can be arrogant and despotic. Ziyan's voice suddenly disappeared with her surprise as she discovered that Hell King was no longer having an intimate chat with her young miss, and was unexpectedly making his way over. Seeing Hell King's handsome face, with his tall and straight figure, both of Ziyan's cheeks instantly blushed. Slightly bowing her head, the corners of her mouth were tinged with the traces of a shy smile. However, Nangongyu didn't pay any attention at all to the existence of Ziyan, rather, he quickly moved in front of He, reaching out his hand to pat her head. What are you talking about? Why are you so serious that you were even unaware that this king had arrived? He subconsciously wanted to avoid Nangongyu's hand, but what kind of person was Nangongyu? Now that his strength was back to its peak, how could He avoid him? As a result, he didn't only caress her head, but had also gently pulled her waist into his embrace. The man's deep and quiet laughter echoed in her ears as he said, You're still angry? He was just about to struggle, when all of a sudden her whole body quivered. She could sense a strong murderous aura coming from behind her, as if someone wanted to dismember her body into 1,000 pieces. But this murderous aura only lasted for a moment, because when He turned to find the source, she could only see the Ice Lotus Fairy's expression lightly examining them, the corners of her mouth lifted into a shallow smile. Her face revealed no clues as to where the aura had come from. He frowned and pushed Nangongyu away. We're talking about the future princess of Hell King Manor. Indeed, such an ideal couple, a match made in heaven. Nangongyu couldn't help but laugh, and lowering his voice, he leaned close to He's ear and softly whispered, Shi'er, are you praising yourself? Ah, but what you said is right, I like it. He sighed sadly, in the end, does this guy really not understand, or is he pretending to not understand? Stop acting stupid in front of me, the beauty is over there. Your Highness Hell King, please refrain from teasing me in the future. Nangongyu stared blankly. After their relationship had become more familiar, He rarely called him His Highness Hell King. But when he noticed the sneer on this girl's mouth, and her cold eyes, he realized that she really was angry. But, why is Shi'er angry? Nangongyu turned his head to glance at Ice Lotus Fairy standing at a distance from them. With his eyes immediately lighting up with realization, he quietly laughed. Shi'er, are you jealous? He unhappily glared at him. What jealousy are you talking about? You're thinking too much. Just continue receiving your lovable visitor, I'm very busy so I'm leaving now. Nangongyu pulled He back into his arms as she was about to leave, whispering so that only the two of them could hear. Such an awkward girl, just admit that you like this king. Is it so difficult for you to admit you feel jealous to this king? Seeing He about to burst, he promptly explained, mine and Lian Ying's relationship isn't like what you're thinking. Be good and don't think too much, alright? I'll get Bai Hu to send you back, as I have a few matters to which I have to handle these next few days. The person who hired the Drought Demon organization to kill you still hasn't been found, so during these days you should stay at home as much as possible, only going out if need be. If there is something you need, find Bai Hu, and you must constantly wear the imprint that I gave you, so I know whether you're safe or not. As soon as I've finished dealing with this matter, I'll find you. Nangongyu softly kissed the side of her face, his voice gentle. Obediently wait for me at home, He felt that the surrounding glares on her were so scorching, that they felt like they would burn a hole through her clothes. Her face immediately turned red, and she quickly pushed him away again. No need to have Bai Hu send me, I can go back on my own. Chapter 190, Are You Looking for Me? Finished speaking, her feet flashed as she rapidly fled away. She didn't realize that her depressed mood had unknowingly changed into a combination of shyness, annoyance, and relief. With the warmth from Nangong Yu's kiss still lingering on her cheek, her whole face unknowingly turned red, spreading all the way to the tips of her ears. As Ziyan watched Nangong Yu and Heshi's interaction from the side, her complexion turned green, then white, and she clenched her jaw so tightly that it almost crushed her white teeth. This youngster, although his appearance was elegant, he was still only a man, so how could Hell King be interested in him? Could it be that the rumors were true, His Highness Hell King really had that kind of hobby? He's cold towards women because he likes men. Then what about her young miss? Ziyan anxiously looked at Ice Lotus Fairy, Feng Lianing, only to see that her expression was still as calm as ever. Her beautiful eyes were as tranquil as water while she gazed at Nangong Yu, not even the slightest trace of haziness or darkness could be seen. It wasn't until Nangong Yu was sure that Heshi had left his manor, that he turned towards Feng Lianing and said, "Let's go, we can go to the study to talk." Obviously Xier had just left, but he was already impatient to see her again. This is the first time that Nangong Yu had understood the expression, "One day apart feels like 3 years." He really hoped that he would be able to marry Xier as soon as possible. Feng Lianing agreed, then seemingly asked unintentionally, "The young master that just left he's called Xiyu, since Xier doesn't like people knowing her identity, he would naturally help her to hide it." "My personal doctor, and as far as I'm concerned, a very important person to me." While he was speaking, Nangong Yu recalled how the two of them were getting along, his eyes turning soft with love and tenderness. Feng Lianing lowered her gaze, her expression hidden in the shadows. After exiting Hell King Manor, Heshi turned to go down East Street, towards the medicinal ingredients store. Although a lot of spiritual plants were now growing in her space, most of them were somewhat valuable, while the remainder were common spiritual plants used for refining. And because she had used up a large amount of spiritual plants and materials when she had been practicing her refining, she didn't have much supplies left and decided to buy the replacements today. After barely walking around the corner, Heshi abruptly sensed a burst of coldness behind her. It seemed that someone was firmly glaring at her with a strong murderous aura. She steadily continued her pace, the trace of a smirk appearing at a corner of her mouth. Someone wants to follow her. Even back when she had no spiritual power, she was still able to sense Qing Long following her, while the person who was following her now was obviously much weaker compared to Qing Long. The next moment Heshi sped up, her figure completely disappearing by a remote corner. Here there was a small shabby alley, and although it was close to the bustling East Street, it was a place where many beggars liked to sleep at night and was permeated with the stench of unwashed bodies, urine, and feces. Because of this, few people ever ventured near. Several breaths after Heshi disappeared, the figure of a woman dressed in white appeared in the small alley. With no mask covering her face, her delicate and pretty facial features were clearly visible, yet her eyes were filled with killing intent and a touch of surprise. She had definitely seen Heshi enter the alley, but just a breath later, and she had completely lost all traces of her. Obviously she, herself, is at the peak of foundation establishment stage, while the other party is merely a boy on chi refining stage, so how could she have lost him? Just when the woman dressed in white was becoming bewildered, her ears abruptly heard a voice speaking with a cold sneer. "Are you looking for me?" The woman dressed in white was immediately startled, and before her eyes, the youngster's figure very quickly appeared. Under the sunshine, the youngster's skin seemed like sparkling and translucent jade, bright and dazzling. Yet, his beautiful phoenix eyes were filled with cold frost, chilling those that saw them. Chapter 191, Earthbound Spirit Poison. The woman dressed in white felt an indescribable sensation, and couldn't help but quiver all over as she was stared at by those eyes. Immediately after, she realized that the youngster's cultivation base was only at chi refining stage, and she coldly snorted. "Boy, I'll acknowledge that your little trick worked, you were unexpectedly able to cover your tracks." Unfortunately though, you've overestimated your abilities, and if you had escaped a moment ago, perhaps you would have had the opportunity to live. I didn't expect you to be so stupid, delivering yourself to my door. Humph, don't blame me for being ruthless. She slightly raised her brow. Oh, is that so? So that's to say, you following me the whole way because you intend to kill me? Is she really so easy to bully that people think they're able to come and assassinate her? The account between Drought Demon Organization has yet to be settled, and yet here comes another one. The woman dressed in white coldly said, "At first the order I accepted was to find out your identity, then to look for an opportunity to get rid of you. But now it seems that I don't have to investigate and can just let you die without a burial place, regardless of your identity and background." Ha, so you want to kill me here? What, now you know how to be afraid? The woman dressed in white burst out into loud laughter. Unfortunately, it's already too late. As she finished speaking she began to gather her spiritual power, and bringing out her flying sword with a swish, she flew towards Hashi. The flying sword not only headed straight for Hashi with severe power, but also brought with it an icy cold energy, freezing the air around it into frost as it traveled. The most peculiar thing of all though, was that the spiritual energy in the atmosphere seemed to be absorbed as the flying sword swept past. This caused the momentum of the flying sword to become fiercer, and so as the flying sword drew closer to Hashi, she also sensed the intense suction of spiritual energy. Annoying boy. Go die. Spiritual power ruthlessly rushed forwards from the woman's hand, her delicate and pretty features warped into a sinister smile. Yet the moment the flying sword was about to pierce Hashi, stabbing her weak body, the woman dressed in white thought something flashed before her eyes, and suddenly Hashi had already disappeared from her original position. The woman stared blankly, then she abruptly went white with shock and wanted to recall her flying sword. But the next moment, she found that she couldn't move. With her body frozen with one leg forward, and one leg back, her hands flailed about as she tried to use her spiritual power. This position was very strange and hilarious, yet she was unable to budge even the tiniest bit. The worst part was that she could feel her feet becoming colder and slowly freezing, as if someone was wrapping a layer of mud around her skin. It was at this moment that Hashi's cold voice echoed in her ears. "How is it, do you still want to kill me now?" Panic flashed across the woman's face, her eyes filling with intense dread. What are you doing to me? Why can't I move?" "Oh, this is a type of poison called earth-bound spirit poison. I made it for fun in my free time." Moving around to the front of her, Hashi kicked the woman's stiff lower leg, indifferently laughing as she said, "Earth-bound spirit poison makes a person's body completely stiff. It's like it becomes possessed by an evil spirit binding them to the ground, causing them to be unable to move a muscle. With time the body deteriorates, gradually becoming stiffer and weaker, until finally, it resembles a stone statue. One touch is all it takes for it to break into 1,000,000 pieces." The more the woman dressed in white heard, the more pronounced the fear on her face became. She was so afraid, that the muscles in her face started twitching. Hashi nonetheless laughed. "But you don't have to worry, earthbound spirit poison's solidification is only really effective on an ordinary person's body. For a martial artist, as long they have spiritual power to protect themselves, it isn't so easy for them to become a stone statue. Earthbound spirit poison will only hinder you from moving for a few hours, that's all." Chapter 192, Squirrel Human Fish. Hearing this, the woman dressed in white immediately released a sigh of relief, yet before the fear in her eyes could vanish, Hashi continued. "You don't have to worry about earthbound spirit poison, because what you should be worrying about, is what I'll be doing to you next." With that, she pointed at the flying sword lying on the ground. Suddenly, the flying sword that had originally belonged to the woman dressed in white leaped into Hashi's hand. Slicing the long sword through the air a few times, Hashi then lightly tapped the sword's edge against the woman's face. The woman dressed in white felt the cold metal and sharp edge against her cheek, and instantly turned pale with fright. "What are you doing? Is there any woman who doesn't appreciate her own beauty?" No woman wouldn't feel scared when their face was being threatened. He coldly said, "Speak, who sent you? If you tell me, I'll leave your body intact." The woman's eyes flashed with a trace of alarm, and she immediately shouted, "Since I'll die anyway, why should I tell you anything?" "Oh, such a courageous spirit," He withdrew the long sword, clicking her tongue as she said, "However, don't you know how many kinds of methods there are to kill people? If you're beheaded, you're dead. If you're skinned alive, you're dead. One long slice across the waist with a sword, you're also dead. Do you really think that dying by these methods is all the same?" The complexion of the woman dressed in white quickly became deathly pale. She had only described simple methods of execution, but the woman was already so scared that her whole body was trembling. Unable to bear it any longer, she yelled, "Don't you know who I am? If you kill me, you absolutely won't be able to escape." Abruptly halting her words, the woman dressed in white firmly bit her lips, refusing to continue speaking. A corner of Heshi's mouth curled upwards. "Do you know what my favorite dish is?" The woman dressed in white didn't understand why Heshi suddenly changed the topic to food, yet not daring to speak, she could only firmly glare at Heshi. Heshi continued speaking, "My favorite dish is called squirrel mandarin fish. 1. The so-called squirrel mandarin fish isn't really made with squirrels, rather, it's made with fresh fish. First you slice the fish meat into thin pieces without completely cutting them off, then, you take a spoonful of hot oil and pour it on top. Just listen to the squeaky sounds it makes, it resembles the sounds a real squirrel makes. The delicious and fresh taste that dances on the tip of your tongue, it's a temptation that most top chefs can't resist." The woman dressed in white paled further, while the expression in Heshi's eyes as she looked at her caused the woman's hair to stand on end. Heshi's next words frightened the woman so badly that she nearly fainted. "I know, how about I make you into a squirrel human fish? First, I'll slice the flesh on your body into strips, making sure that the thickness is well distributed so that they won't rip off. Then, I'll place you on a big iron plate to grill you, slowly pouring on the hot oil. I've never made such a big squirrel human fish before, but I believe that the taste will be particularly delicious." As she finished speaking, she examined every inch of the woman's skin, mentally measuring up the material she had to work with. The woman dressed in white was so frightened that she almost collapsed, and as she was on the verge of sobbing, her voice cracked as she spoke, "You wouldn't dare. You wouldn't dare do that to me." But, without waiting for the woman dressed in white to finish shouting, the long sword in Heshi's hand suddenly waved through the air. Ah! The woman let out a miserable shriek, tears and mucus streaming down her face. Where before there was smooth skin on her cheek, there was now a thin piece of flesh hanging down to her neck, exposing the tender pink flesh inside. However, what was weird is that even though this was clearly such a big wound, not the slightest amount of blood could be seen oozing out from it. Heshi lightly laughed. "You still want to say whether I'll dare to or not?" After saying this, she approached and looked at that piece of flesh. "Seems that the thickness of the cut isn't well distributed. Since I haven't made squirrel mandarin fish in such a long time, it seems that my hands have become stiff. I'd better try slicing another section. 1. In making this dish, a whole fish is deboned with the fillet still attached to the tail. The fillet is then cut in a crosshatch pattern and when deep fried, will look like a squirrel in flight. The sauce served with it is sweet, slightly tangy and pleasantly red. Red is the auspicious color for the Chinese, so this sauce is extremely appropriate for the Chinese New Year. It is the signature dish of the premier restaurant of Jiangsu cuisine, known as Su Xiao Xiao. Apparently, a long time ago, an emperor wanted to eat carp, but carp was forbidden by his own laws. Of course, being the emperor, he wanted to get his way and told his chef that his head would be on the ground if he was not served carp. His chef then had to devise a way to make the carp uncarp-like, and using his unmatched kitchen techniques, made the fish to look like a flying squirrel instead. Another legend has it that during Emperor Qianlong's extensive tour of the south, he caught sight of a particularly frisky carp and, delighted by its apparent zest for life, ordered it to be cooked immediately. In an attempt to capture the fish's former joie de vivre, the chef focused on giving it a reanimated look when he fried it. Others say that the origin of the dish's name lies in the squirrel-like squeaks and squeals that erupt from the flesh when hot sauce is poured over it. Chapter 193, Demon. After Heshi finished speaking, she raised the long sword in her hand. The woman dressed in white saw the cold edge of the sword press closer to her, and was no longer able to endure the painful torture and her fear. Her expression collapsed as she shouted, I'll speak, I beg of you to spare me. Then speak, on whose order did you come here to kill me? It was Hell King Manor. The people from Hell King Manor ordered me to kill you. Hell King Manor? Heshi narrowed her eyes. Why would the people from Hell King Manor want to kill me? And which person is the one who wants to kill me? The woman's entire body twitched, and with her eyes slightly flickering to the side, she weepingly said, It was Qing Long. Right, it was Qing Long who ordered me to kill you. Because you're a man, and yet you still dared to seduce His Highness Hell King, ruining His Highness Hell King's reputation. This caused Qing Long and the others to want you dead, so they sent me to kill you. Qing Long wanted to kill her. Because she used the identity of a man to seduce Nan Gongyu? This was simply a big joke. Did they think of her as a 3-year-old foolish son? However, Qing Long, Bai Hu, and the others, already knew that she was a woman. Moreover, if they wanted to kill someone, they wouldn't send such a trashy person to do it for them. Heshi sneered, slicing another chunk of flesh off of the woman's face. Since you don't want to tell me, then don't tell me. I don't have much interest in who wants to kill me anyway. As a matter of fact, you would be better used as a practice dummy for my knife skills. The flesh on the woman's face, and the flesh on her arms, was sliced off piece by piece. The woman dressed in white let out a sharp shriek filled with misery. Even though this type of injury was common for martial artists and could easily be cured, the process of this torture was really too horrible. The woman thought that the person before her eyes was simply a demon, causing her to experience true fear this time. Who knew what kind of terrible punishment would be waiting for her next? The woman dressed in white finally broke into tears. I'll speak, it was Zi Yan who ordered me. Please spare me. Zi Yan? For a moment, Heshi didn't react to the name Zi Yan. Who is she? Why does she want to kill me? The woman dressed in white wept while saying, I'm Bai Ji, I serve my young Mississippi. Compared to me, Zi Yan is a higher-ranked servant as she is young Mrs.'s personal maid. Zi Yan said that you were seducing His Highness Hell King, causing our young Miss heartbreak, so she ordered me to kill you. As long as I could accomplish this task, she would request that the young Miss raises my status. Heshi's eyebrows slightly pursed. Is your young Miss that Ice Lotus Fairy? That's right. The mention of her young Miss made the woman dressed in white's face to immediately expose an expression of reverence. My young Miss is the Feng family's young Miss, born of the first wife. She is also Lu Li Sect's young clan head. Throughout all of Mi Luo continent, the only one who is fit to partner with Hell King is my young Mississippi. Who are you? You're a man and yet you're unexpectedly so shameless as to willingly lie low under a man's body. Even attempting to vainly snatch away His Highness Hell King. I'm warning you, you had better release me this instant, otherwise, my young Miss will absolutely not let you off. Okay. The trace of a sneer appeared around the edges of Heshi's mouth. I've heard your warning very clearly. Now as for you, you can go and die already. With her words having barely fallen from her mouth, and without waiting for Bai Ji to react, Heshi gripped the woman's neck with one hand. Slightly pressing down with her fingers, a crack could be heard echoing down the alley. Bai Ji's eyes abruptly opened wide, her face filled with horror, and soon, her head drooped down, her neck lacking any strength. She, a second-ranked servant of the Feng family, a martial artist at the peak of foundation establishment stage, in the end was unable to even let out a groan and silently died. Heshi stared at the dead body, not a trace of emotion visible in her eyes. From a pocket near her chest, she then removed a small bottle of corroding bone water, pouring it onto the dead body. Chapter 194, Old Beggar Man. A moment later, the dead body issued shoo sounds, followed by clouds of white smoke and a rotten stench that permeated the air. After several breaths, Baiji's dead body disappeared without a trace. After she had finished dealing with Baiji's body, He turned around to leave when suddenly, from behind her, she heard a faint sigh. Such a vicious baby doll. Not even such cruel torture was enough. You even went and destroyed that person's body, exterminating all traces of her. Ha, but whatever, you let me see such a good play. She abruptly quivered all over, then quickly turned around. But once she turned around, it was to discover that there was no one there, it was just an empty alley. Not even a person's shadow could be seen, and yet she had obviously heard someone's voice. Moreover, even though she was releasing her spiritual power and divine sense with all her might, she couldn't sense the slightest hint of another party's existence. How could this be possible? Even if it was Nangongyu standing in the shadows, her highly perceptive awareness would be able to sense him. In the end, just how powerful was this person? She became frightened, however, on the surface she still looked calm. With her eyes tightly scrutinizing her surroundings, she coldly shouted, "Who are you?" A person who hides their head and only reveals their tail while peeping on others, is that decent behavior? The sound of laughter suddenly echoed throughout the empty alley, and this time since He was listening very carefully, she discovered that it was the voice of a man. Furthermore, it was the voice of an old man. While He was still bewildered, a figure unexpectedly appeared in front of her out of thin air. It was an old man dressed in rags with messy hair and a dirty appearance. As an indescribable stench wafted from his body, he examined He and laughed. Standing in the alley, he would occasionally take long gulps from a broken gourd bottle in one of his hands. An old beggar man such as this could be said to be a common sight on this street. If he were to mix in with the other beggars lying on the ground in piles at night, no one would be able to detect any abnormalities. But at first glance of this person He had felt like she was facing an enemy, and was unwilling to let down her guard in the slightest. Because, even with her extraordinary abilities and how she was able to effortlessly determine Nangongyu's rank, she was completely unable to determine the rank of the old beggar man before her eyes. And this old beggar man, not only had he been able to follow her without her realizing, but he had also managed to see through her disguise as a man with just a glance. What made He even more apprehensive, was that after Dandan had noticed the old beggar man, he kept shouting at her in a panic from her space. "Mother, I'm afraid. Then hide in the spirit firmament palace and don't dare come out." Dandan's fear, coupled with how she still couldn't sense any spiritual power fluctuations coming from the old beggar man's body, could only prove that the old beggar man's rank was higher than hers. But, He's character has always been one that would rather break than bend. Even if she was facing a strong opponent that would end with a fight to the death, she would never choose to back down and show weakness. Therefore, after only being shocked for a moment, she then coldly asked, "Who are you that you've come to fight for justice for her? Were you that woman's partner?" "Baby doll, your looks are very pretty, but how can your eyesight be so bad? Does this old man look like that woman's partner?" Hearing what she asked, the old beggar man became angry. As he jumped around and pointed at He while scolding her, he completely lacked the poise and refinement of a gentleman. If He hadn't known beforehand that he was a high-level expert, she would seriously think that this was just an insane old man. He sneered. Peeping from the shadows, following someone, and saying bad things behind a person's back, those things don't count as decent behavior, right? The old man choked, his beard whipping furiously through the air as he replied, "This old man is clearly an honorable and moral person, how could this be considered as peeping? It's you, baby doll's ability that's not decent. Just because you were unable to discover this old man's presence, why do you have to blame me?" He was too lazy to pay attention to this old beggar man who seemed like an annoying troublemaker any longer. Since he had no malice towards her, then it wasn't necessary for her to debate with him anymore. Chapter 195, Surprise Attack. Unfortunately, Hashi had barely lifted her foot to walk away, when she abruptly felt a burst of coldness coming from behind her. The next moment she sensed a strong force of spiritual power, honed into a sharp blade, heading towards her spine at the speed of lightning. Without time to think, she removed her whip from her space. Rotating her body 180 degrees, she used the momentum of her turn to firmly whip the weapon that was attacking her. A crack echoed down the alley, and the tip of the bone whip scraped against the ground, causing a burst of sparks to fly into the air. However, the weapon that had been attacking her surprisingly disappeared without a trace, only to unexpectedly reappear swaying before her eyes. Hashi's mouth flattened into a thin line. She hadn't expected that it would be a gourd bottle that was attacking her. The gourd bottle was now swaying in the air as it floated before her, occasionally nodding forward, as if it was mocking Hashi for her incompetence. Hashi glared at the old man. "Didn't you just say that you and her weren't partners?" The old beggar man scratched at the louse on his head, and while laughing mischievously, he said, "Of course this old man isn't her partner. But you wrongly accused me, baby doll, and if I don't do anything as payback, then how could this old man have any face?" As Hashi's expression sank, she turned around to escape by using her evade technique. Unfortunately, even though her movements were fast, the gourd bottle ended up being faster than her. Practically every time she would try to use her evade technique to leave, the gourd bottle would completely intercept her. When Hashi used her bone whip to attack, the gourd bottle would dodge and withdraw to a safe distance, swinging its rotund body as it continued to ridicule her efforts. Hashi's eyes slowly hardened. It seemed like the gourd bottle was able to clearly read her mind, as it was able to predict her every action. Since there was no way to guess what her opponent's first strike would be, she could only catch him off guard with a surprise attack. With her next course of action planned, Hashi pretended to use her evade technique, and sure enough, the gourd bottle went to attack her with a strong amount of spiritual pressure. Yet Hashi not only didn't stop this time, rather, she released all of her spiritual power. So without retreating, and instead continuing forward, her whole body was like a sharply honed blade as she dashed towards the gourd bottle. In a split second, Hashi's whole body released a bitingly cold, murderous aura, that could cause people to tremble. The old beggar man's expression abruptly changed. Originally he had had the look of one watching a good play, but now he was slightly startled as he stared blankly at Hashi. And due to his absent-mindedness, the gourd bottle's attacks halted and it froze in midair. With a loud crack, the gourd bottle was split in half by the bone whip, before it then shattered into hundreds of small pieces and fell to the ground. This caused the spiritual wine inside to cascade out, permeating the air of the alley with the smell of wine. The old beggar man stared blankly once again, then immediately rushed over to the gourd bottle in distress. As he reached the puddle of wine, he repeatedly walked around it as he breathed in the fragrance of wine. "Ah, my wine, my divine wine. You must be a girl who's unable to tell the difference between good and bad. Do you know that this wine isn't easy to get? Only after trading away 1,000 treasures was I finally able to get this small amount. Did you know that throughout all of Yanjing City there isn't a second bottle?" Hashi raised her nose into the air, disgust promptly revealing itself on her face. What divine wine? According to what she had seen, calling it imitation wine would be good enough. It could in no way come close to matching the spiritual wine that she currently had fermenting in the 9th secluded spirit spring. When she thought of the fruit wine that she had brewed in her past life, she knew that even the taste of this wine was incomparable to that. Apart from the small amount of spiritual energy that the spilled wine had held, what was so special about it? Furthermore, being unable to find another bottle in all of Yanjing City? Why not just say that you hadn't seen another one in the whole world? The old beggar man grabbed Hashi's shoulders and yelled, "I don't care. Baby doll, it's you who knocked over my wine, so quickly replace it as compensation. Otherwise, I'll finish you." Hashi's complexion turned black and she glared at him. "What do you mean, you smelly old man? It was obviously you who attacked first, so why should I compensate you?" I don't care. The old beggar man was furious. You had better compensate me for my precious divine wine. If you don't, then in the future, you can just become my little maiden girl. 1. Similar to the concept of child angels in the West, maiden girls and boys are children who serve the deities in heaven or temples. Chapter 196, Tantalizing Wine. As the old beggar man's implication fell, she felt the spiritual power within her body suddenly freeze. She didn't feel any obvious spiritual power pressure, yet her limbs were pinned in place, and she was unable to take even a single step. Heshi's complexion changed greatly, feeling somewhat helpless before this shameless old scoundrel. If she didn't compensate him with wine, maybe he really would turn her into a maiden girl. She unhappily said, "Okay, so it's just a broken bottle of wine, right? So if I just compensate you it'll be okay? Stop trying to fool me." The old beggar man in no way trusted her. "Do you know where divine wine can be found? Which spiritual kitchen has a master vintner?" "Why should I know that?" Heshi sneered. "I only know that the wine I ferment is 100 times better than your spilled divine wine. If you don't believe me, release me, and I'll immediately bring it out and give it to you." The old beggar man was stumped for words and stared blankly at Heshi. Slowly, suspicion crept onto his face. "Baby doll, don't think that you can deceive this old man." With that, his eyes flashed, and Heshi felt movement return to her limbs again. With a calm and collected face, she fished out a jug of her potent wine from the 9th secluded spirit spring. This wine was an imitation of Chinese white wine from her past life, and since it was made with the spiritual fruit from her space and diluted with spirit spring water, an ordinary person would become completely drunk with only 1 cup. It's best if you drink till death, old man." The old beggar man had originally believed that Heshi was only talking big, as after all, even the top spiritual kitchen in Miluo continent didn't necessarily have a master vintner. She was just a little teenage girl. How would she able to ferment good wine? However, when Heshi's hand held out a small black wine jug, the old beggar man's expression suddenly changed. From where he stood, he inhaled and tried to smell the contents of the wine jug, then he deeply inhaled again. His muddy eyes immediately lit up, and his gaze focused on the wine jug with such concentration, that it was like he was trying to burn a hole through it. It was covered with a lid, and yet he could already smell the potent tang of alcohol, if the lid was removed so that he could drink the wine. Gulp, the old beggar man sucked in an exaggerated breath. As fast as he could, he snatched the wine jug from Heshi's hand and opened the lid. For a moment, a strong fragrance mixed with spicy undertones assaulted their senses. The scent of Heshi's handmade wine overpowered the fragrance of the spilled divine wine in the alley, as it was far more potent. The old beggar man hurriedly held the wine jug to his lips and swallowed a few hearty mouthfuls. He couldn't help but laugh loudly. Such potent wine! This is truly a superb wine, ha ha ha. Here I've been claiming in vain to be a wine connoisseur, and yet the divine wine that I drank is simply plain bath water compared to this. Heshi was too lazy to watch the smelly old beggar man go crazy with his exuberance, and since the debt between them had been settled, she turned around to leave. When the old beggar man saw that she was about to leave, he suddenly shouted anxiously, "Hey, baby doll, don't go. This wine is really something you fermented by yourself?" Heshi coldly replied, "Yeah, so what?" The old beggar man's eyes shone brightly, and he swallowed down the saliva pooling in his mouth. "Then when you were threatening that woman, when you said something about squirrel mandarin fish, was that also true? Is the dish really so delicious?" Heshi frowned, and asked with impatience, "In the end, what is it that you want? This smelly old man still hasn't settled matters yet." The old man smiled mischievously, and randomly grabbing at his straw-like hair, he licked the edges of his lips. "Baby doll, I see that you're still young, yet have courage, insight, and talented hands. Have you got any past experience? Have you paid your respects to a sect master yet? Mind your own business." However, Heshi had barely finished speaking, when she abruptly felt a burst of formless spiritual power surround her. This spiritual power barrier didn't have a murderous or threatening aura, but it caused her to be unable to move her body once again. Moreover, she had the terrible feeling that her entire body was being thoroughly examined. Chapter 197, Reluctantly Accept You as a Disciple. Heshi's face twisted in anger, and when her body was free to move again, she threw a handful of invisible needles at the old beggar man. The old beggar man dodged with an exaggerated movement while laughing mischievously. Baby doll, while your appearance is pretty good, your temperament, however, needs some work. This old man just wanted to test the level of your body's innate talent, to see whether or not you had the qualifications to become my disciple. Ah, it's not bad at all. Your temperament, strength, and the outstanding innate talent that you already possess at such a young age, all are considered rare qualities in the Jinling Kingdom. Since it's like this old man volunteers to tackle the difficult job of accepting you as my disciple. Heshi became enraged due to this smelly old beggar man's nonsense. She had never before met such a shameless troublemaker who wanted to rush in and accept a disciple. What's more, he even did it with an extremely reluctant attitude. Smelly old man, have you consumed so much wine that it's made you foolish? This young lady has no need of a sect master, and furthermore, I have no need of any type of master. There's no need for you to reluctantly do something you don't want to, as I'm unwilling to pay my respects to you as a master anyway. Finished speaking, Heshi turned around to leave without looking back. Hey, you undiscriminating baby doll, do you know who I am? The old beggar man angrily shouted at Heshi's back. Have you heard of the name Taoist spiritual master Xian Qing before? Go to any random large sect in Jinling Kingdom and see which ones dare not worship me, cough cough. In short, you know, throughout all of heaven and earth there are many people who want to pay respects to me as a master, yet I'm not willing to accept them. Today, I've given you a massive opportunity and have accepted you as my disciple, and yet baby doll, you would actually dare to ignore me. The old beggar man proudly spoke with his nose in the air, waiting for Heshi to return and beg to be his disciple. However, when he glanced in her direction, what was reflected into his eyes was the little girl's retreating figure as she walked further away into the distance. The old beggar man was stunned. He didn't expect that he, someone who was born many years ago, would actually have to sell himself as a master, and yet would still be refused. This baby doll didn't have any foresight, she was simply unable to tell the good from the bad. However, when he thought of that endlessly good wine, and remembered the name of food he had never heard of before, squirrel mandarin fish, gulp. Swallowing his saliva, the old beggar man promptly tossed the dignified manner of a master to the back of his mind, and not caring about his image, he chased after her. Hey, baby doll, is it because you don't believe in my skills? How about this old man demonstrates them for you? I won't move either my hands or my feet, and you see if you can land 3 hits on me. If you can't touch me, you lose. Would you then pay your respects to me as a master? Baby doll, do you know how many benefits you'll gain if you follow me? In the future, all of me Luo continent's handsome bachelors will line up and follow you. No matter how many of them you want, Master will give them all to you. The whole time they were walking, Heshi felt like there was a fly continuously buzzing in her ears. This behavior of non-stop chatter and bargaining, which was completely unlike the usual composure of a master, was similar to the multi-level marketing schemes from her past life. Heshi was now beginning to wonder if her initial perception of him was wrong. In fact, she was now starting to think that he wasn't an expert sect master, and that he was just a genuine crazy man. As they made their way through Yanjing City, Heshi took note of Yanjing City's current situation. She discovered that after the spiritual power vortex had brought misfortune to the city, these past few days, the city had slowly recovered from its shock. Now a small number of people were starting to talk and guess about that unusual phenomenon, while the rest of the population were equally concerned and excited about exploring Tsang Mountain to find where the secret territory was located. This situation, while it wasn't the greatest, was enough to make Heshi sigh in relief. If someone had been able to track the spiritual power vortex, there was a chance that it could lead back to her in the future. Like an ordinary person that was falsely charged with a crime, perhaps she would unexpectedly encounter a variety of martial artists that would attack her from all sides. Or worse, they could try to use her for strange research and experiments. Even with all this, there was still one thing that caused Heshi to be in an excellent mood. Chapter 198, Shameless Old Man. This was due to the withered spiritual plants and spiritual herbs found in Yanjing City. Because of the spiritual power vortex draining the energy out of them, the price for just one spiritual plant stock, or one spiritual herb stock, would now greatly increase. And since all the spiritual plants in Yanjing City were now withered, including the ones stored in jade boxes, people who refined pills and used the spiritual plants for medical treatments, now had no other choice than to purchase them from outside the city. Thus, this would cause the price of medicinal pills and spiritual plants to naturally rise at a frantic pace. Heshi recalled the medical herbs, and the large pile of first-grade medicinal pills, that she had just finished refining in her space. As a corner of her mouth perked up, a sly smile was reflected in her eyes. It seemed that an opportunity for her to make a fortune had finally arrived. The old beggar man following beside Heshi noticed that her expression changed. Rolling his eyes, he laughed as he said, "Oh, I wonder if you've heard about the unusual phenomenon that occurred a few nights ago. It was so dramatic, that even the drunken me was awoken by that thing. TSK, I wonder what sort of senseless person advanced in rank and caused such a huge commotion. If other people had observed this, it would certainly be disastrous. Although, with this so-called unusual phenomenon, there must certainly be treasures. On the surface it appears that the influential families haven't yet made a move, but secretly, they must be looking for the source. Hey, it'll surely be very lively in Yanjing City in the future, right?" As the old beggar man was talking, every so often he would glance at Heshi's face to gauge her reactions. With what he was implying, it was clear that he already knew Heshi was the main culprit behind the phenomenon. Heshi wasn't surprised that the old beggar man knew. When she had been wrapped up in the old beggar man's spiritual power a while ago, she was unable to shield herself and had felt like everything was visible to him. This included the secret of her space and muddled dantian. But, there was no greed or killing intent in the old beggar man's eyes. Instead, there was cunningness and delight, like he was watching a good show. Heshi's face was blank as she spoke. "Oh, is that so? Such a mystical scene, I wish I had also seen it. Unfortunately, I wasn't in the city that day, so I didn't get to see it." The old beggar man's eyebrows raised and he lightly laughed. "Baby doll, it's okay to try and deceive others, but it's naive of you to try and lie to this old man. If I'm not mistaken, the seal within your body was only lifted a short while ago, right? That seal was rather complicated. If that seal had been at its strongest, then even this old man would have had to expend a lot of energy to remove it. For you to have been able to lift the seal so you could advance in rank, you would have naturally required a great amount of spiritual power. Calculating the time of your advancement, it seems to coincide with the time the unusual phenomenon occurred." Speaking until here, the smile on the old beggar man's face became somewhat wicked. "You tell me, with so many coincidences, if it was noticed by anyone observant, wouldn't they suspect you? I'm afraid that many influential families would assume the worst and not let you off." Heshi stopped walking and coldly looked at him. "In the end, what is it that you want?" The old beggar man was startled, promptly repeating his request. "Pay your respects to me as a master. And then give me delicious food every day." Without the slightest hesitation, Heshi shook her head. "No. Aren't you afraid that I'll leak your secrets?" The old beggar man asked in disbelief. "Why is this girl so stubborn?" Heshi sneered, splaying out her hands palm up before her. "Do whatever you wish. Even if he leaked her secrets, so what? Without evidence, how would he be able to prove it? As long as Dandan's existence wasn't revealed, based only on her unsealed muddled dantian, she really didn't believe that she would be hunted down by the martial artists of Mi Luo continent. As for those who offended her, she wouldn't hold back and would pay them back 100-fold. Of course, the most important thing is that He had now come to a conclusion. Such a thing as daring to make another person's secret public, it really was a degrading act. This old beggar man who claimed to be Taoist spiritual master Xian Qing, he was simply not worth thinking about. Chapter 199, Destined Person. When the old beggar man noticed Heshi's carefree attitude, he became incensed. Since the start he had been speaking until the skin on his lips became chapped, yet this little girl remained completely unmoved. Paying respects to him as a master was an opportunity that people yearned for, something they dreamed about. Yet why is there such a smelly girl in this world who didn't even put him in her eyes? And yet even though this little girl had nothing but disdain for him, he was still following her. At first it was only for food, but now, he wanted to make this girl kowtow before him for just one breath. To think that he was the dignified Taoist spiritual master Xian Qing, could it be that he would have to yield to a little girl? What a joke! During the old beggar man's endless talking, He finally arrived at the foot of Tsang Mountain. Currently, there were countless martial artists gathered on the east side of Tsang Mountain. What made He apprehensive though, was that compared to the previous collection of Meridian stage martial artists, there were now even several gold core stage martial artists loitering around too. Most of them circled around the base of Tsang Mountain, while everyone's eyes were trying to fixedly stare into the depths of Tsang Mountain. Sometimes they would look at each other with mutual understanding, their eyes brimming with a sparkling radiance. However, the strangest part was, that amongst all these cultivators, no one dared to enter the depths of Tsang Mountain. Even the several low-level martial artists that had still been lingering around Tsang Mountain a few days ago were now no longer visible. The people standing at the foot of Tsang Mountain had clearly reached a consensus. Now they were waiting at the foot of Tsang Mountain, waiting for an important moment to approach. In the end, what was actually inside Tsang Mountain that made this group of people so determined to wait? But after seeing so many gold core stage martial artists, and even the arrival of a few nascent soul stage martial artists, He completely stopped that train of thought. She was arrogant, but she wasn't conceited enough to think that she could handle 2 gold core stage martial artists. There was only one choice: if there was a group of gold core stage martial artists against her, then of course she would run away. What caused He to rejoice though, is that even all the martial artists were congregating around Tsang Mountain. Apparently everyone was already determined to focus on the direction of the entrance, which was on the west side of Tsang Mountain. And since Tsang Mountain was so vast, the north side was located on the other side of the country. Therefore, looking at the current situation, it seemed that her courtyard was still safe. Since the group of martial artists' eyes were all focused towards the west side, no one would come to inquire about a remote and shabby courtyard on the east side of Tsang Mountain. He let out a sigh of relief, but then noticed that somewhere along the way the noisy old beggar man had suddenly become quiet. He turned to see that the old beggar man was frowning as he pointedly looked at Tsang Mountain. He then quietly muttered, "I didn't expect that so many people would already be here. Could it be that it really is?" His next few words were too vague and muffled for He to make out. Turning slightly to glance at He continued and said, "Perhaps this was fated, and you're the destined person." What destined person? Has this old beggar man become insane? Instead of talking nonsense, he's now talking about something strange. However, watching the martial artists and the old beggar man's countenance, it seemed like there really was a secret territory hidden within Tsang Mountain. It was obviously a mountain without spiritual energy, and even the spiritual plants and spiritual beasts lacked spiritual energy, so how could there be a secret place? "Baby doll, do you want to go to the secret territory?" The old beggar man's voice suddenly echoed in her ears, and He instantly responded with, "I don't want to." The old beggar man's patient expression immediately stiffened, and he exclaimed in disbelief, "Baby doll, don't you know about the 1,000-year-old secret territory? It's a treasure-filled land that all martial artists yearn to find. Home to a countless number of treasures, there's also the opportunity that you might find something beyond your wildest dreams. Why don't you want to go? Chapter 200, Help You. What's the matter with this girl? She's so stubborn that she won't listen to anyone's advice. Even the secret territory that made all the martial artists go crazy wasn't tempting enough for her. She completely lacked any greediness. In the end, was this girl normal? She sneered coldly, and with an indistinct expression in her eyes as she watched the group of martial artists, she indifferently said, I would like to see the secret territory and treasure, but compared to those things, I cherish my life more. Do you think that I'd be able to beat those people? The old beggar man wanted to say, but isn't there still me as a master? But when he heard Hashi continue speaking, he decided to keep quiet. The things that I want in life, I will personally grab them. If I desire status, I'll climb up step by step. What has been taken from me, will one day belong to me again, and if it isn't mine, it's useless to fight for it. Finished speaking, and without the slightest hesitation, she turned around and walked over to her small courtyard. Remaining where he stood, the old beggar man stroked his beard. He then clicked his tongue and shook his head. Baby doll's character is so stubborn. Doesn't she have any ambition? Just because you don't want to let this old man help you, you think I'd listen to your words? He, this old man will help you. When the time comes, baby doll, you'll owe me a huge favor. You not paying your respects to me as a master is impossible. My delicious food, gulp. As soon as Hashi returned to her courtyard, she was greeted with enthusiasm from Wet Nurse Chen, Shaoli, and the others. Shaoli hugged Hashi's arm, fondness shining on her face as she said, Miss, why did you go out for so long? I missed you. That's right, miss. Wet Nurse Chen sized Hashi up, examining her clothes to see if there were any tears. You're a precious eldest miss. Even if you disguise yourself as a man, how can you stay outside overnight? If someone conspired against you and ruined your reputation, how would that be good? Inexplicably, Hashi recalled Nangong Yu's shameless flirting and teasing. When she remembered that he had told all of Hell King Manor's attendants to address her as princess, a blush immediately crept up her cheeks. After obediently listening to Wet Nurse Chen's nagging, and indulging Xiao Li's pampered child antics, Hashi took their pulses. Xiao Li's body was recovering very well. Although her lost tail wouldn't grow back for a long time, the spiritual power within her body was abundant, and she no longer needed to worry that her identity would be discovered by people. Moreover, seeing her rosy complexion, the happy smile on her face, and her continuous chatter, with one look anyone would know that her life in Hashi's courtyard was very good. Her whole countenance was far more cheerful than previously, and she was no longer that shy, pale little girl who would hide behind her brother. As for the condition of Wet Nurse Chen's body, that was a little bit more complicated. After all, it's an old illness, and added with the fact that she hadn't been able to cultivate these past few years, all of her meridians had long since dried up. Therefore, for her to restore all of her lost strength, she would require a long period of rest. However, her dantian had already begun to accumulate spiritual power, so she would soon reach the third rank of qi refining stage. Wet Nurse Chen wiped her tears, sighing with sorrow. Miss, your medical skills are really amazing. This old servant never thought that she would be able to cultivate in this lifetime ever again. This must be Madame's soul in heaven blessing and protecting you. Miss, in the future, you might possibly marry a good person, then when the time comes that I go to the underworld, this old servant will be able to inform Madame. Hashi couldn't even force out a bitter laugh. Doesn't Wet Nurse Chen know that following in the wake of cultivation, a person's body will become younger? Yet she's already planning what she will inform Madame of when she arrives in the underworld. Although the people around Hashi nagged and worried, it was all done out of concern and care for her. In her past life, Hashi had never experienced these kind of emotions aimed towards her before. It caused her to feel an indescribable fondness for these people. After dismissing wet nurse Chen and Xiao Li, He summoned Shi Jia. When he arrived, she then fished out a pill and gave it to him. Chapter 201, Completion of Qi Refining Stage. This medicinal pill was something she had refined in Hell King Manor. Although it was a grade 1 medicinal pill, it wasn't made following a prescription used in Mi Luo continent, or one that was from the overflowing cauldron pill scripture. Rather, it was made according to Shi Jia and the others' body types, combined with a kind of intensifier to strengthen a cultivator's physique. This medicinal pill prescription was something that was listed in the overflowing cauldron pill scripture, but then He had improved on it, creating the current prescription by herself. At first she had failed several times, until the last time, when she finally succeeded in her refining. As a result, she was only able to make a total of 30 pills. He pointed at the medicinal pill and said to Shi Jia, "I've checked the descriptions of Mi Luo continent's medicinal pills, and found that they were basically focused on refining the spiritual power of a martial artist. Yet for all of you, you're all walking on a different path compared to an ordinary martial artist. Therefore, based on your unusual physical and spiritual advancement road, I specially refined this medicinal pill for you. However, I don't know whether or not this medicinal pill will have side effects, and I also don't know whether or not it will be able to help you advance to foundation establishment stage. You can choose to eat it or not." Actually, He already knew that this medicinal pill wouldn't have any side effects. She knew that its biggest effect was to enhance a person's strength and speed, tempering a martial artist's muscles and bones, all so that their body could achieve the result of resistance to spiritual power attacks. However, when all was said and done, this was the first time that she had refined anything. Moreover, it was her self-created prescription. So just in case, she wanted to explain it all to Shi Jia and the others. But before He had even finished speaking, without hesitation, Shi Jia picked up the medicinal pill and swallowed it. After a moment, Shi Jia felt heat in his abdomen. Following this, his meridians, including his dantian that had been devoid of spiritual power, suddenly became boiling hot. It was as if there was a steady flow of heat surging throughout his entire body. He told him, "The force that is currently surging throughout your body will enter your meridians, circulating your body 12 times. After each lap, your body's strength will increase." Shi Jia promptly sat cross-legged, and in accordance with He's instructions, he began to slowly absorb this powerful force. An hour later, Shi Jia rose from the ground with astonishment plastered across his face. Lifting one of his hands before his eyes, he formed a fist, and he seemed to hear each individual joint crack. It was like his body was now covered in a fine dusting of gold. "Miss, I believe I've perfectly completed Qi refining stage," Shi Jia shouted in pleasant surprise. In just one short hour he had gone from being 9th rank Qi refining stage, to actually having completed it. This is something which he had never before believed possible, and yet, to his astonishment, young Miss had helped him to accomplish it. He nodded and said, "Disperse these medicinal pills to everyone. I want to see the results they have on everyone, so this time it's only one per person." "Yes, Miss." Shi Jia suppressed his excitement, taking the medicinal pills from He's hand. "Once my brothers receive the medicinal pills, they will certainly be happy." He then asked, "How's the situation surrounding Tsang Mountain been these past few days?" Shi Jia swiftly repressed his joyful expression and respectfully said, answering Miss, "The past few days a lot more people have come to visit Tsang Mountain, but they mostly focus on the west side of Tsang Mountain. A few days ago we had a number of martial artists examining our surroundings, but after that, no one has come here again." This subordinate sent people to secretly investigate the martial artists gathering around the west side of Tsang Mountain, and discovered that not only are some of the martial artists from influential families and Jin Ling sects, there are also martial artists from other countries, as well as people from the royal family. Previously quite a few conflicts occurred between the groups, but now it seems to have calmed down. Although, even when they do fight, they fight at a distance, as if they were afraid to alarm something inside Tsang Mountain. He frowned. Regardless of what happens outside, don't bother about it. Don't go near the west side of Tsang Mountain. At the moment a lot of gold core stage martial artists have gathered there, and with your current strength, you wouldn't be unable to provoke them and live. When you go out try to be careful, don't let people discover you. Chapter 202, Lonely Dandan Shijia quickly nodded. Yes, miss. I will warn everyone here to be careful and to pay attention to their surroundings. Hashi nodded. You may go. With regards to your training, you can now start to enter the second stage. The second stage. Miss had once said that as long as they could get through the second stage's training, that they would then have the strength to fight Foundation Establishment stage martial artists. Shijia nodded excitedly and accepted the medicinal pills from Hashi's hand. But just as he was about to leave, he suddenly stopped and respectfully asked, Miss, may I ask, what are these medicinal pills called? Hashi stared blankly. Name? Those pills were something that she had only recently created. How could she know what they were called? I haven't thought of a name yet. Hashi couldn't care less about it and said, you can all think of a name for it yourselves. Moreover, it was specially refined for all of you anyway. Hearing that, Shijia was immediately filled with delight as he ran off. He and the other servants weren't foolish, they knew how precious this medicine was. Just one pill was enough to finally temper an ordinary person's spiritual root constitution, helping their strength to equal that of a martial artist's after they had used supplement pills and cultivation methods. If the medicinal pills were to be sold on the market, they would absolutely be extremely expensive. However, Miss not only gave it to them without hesitation, she even gave them the right to name it. This was a big honor, it showed how much she trusted them. Hashi didn't expect that just because she was too lazy to think of a name, Shijia would imagine such complicated meanings behind her action. What's more, Hashi didn't expect that the illiterate Shijia and others would straightforwardly name the medicinal pills, invigorating pills. It was unknown now, but in the future, invigorating pills would become extremely famous in Miluo continent, and this horrible name would be forever engraved in every martial artist's memories. After dismissing Shijia, Hashi returned to her room and entered her space. What Hashi had learned in Yanjing City before, had made her realize that now was a good time to make money. But first, she would need to clean up her inventory and then she could sell it all for a high price. Straight after entering her space, Hashi caught sight of Dandan sitting on a pile of mountain melon fruit. With an unhappy expression on its face, it bit into a melon and kicked its small feet in the air. Its fat round face was filled with loneliness and sadness. Once Dandan noticed Hashi, it cried out cheerfully. Throwing away the melon, it then pounced towards Hashi. Mother, why are you only coming and seeing me now? I was almost bored to death in here. What, Mother, I don't want to stay alone in here anymore, I want to go outside and accompany you. Seeing him like this, Hashi felt somewhat sorry. Although her space was vast and rich in spiritual energy, there was only Dandan living alone in here after all, so if she didn't come, then he would certainly be lonely. Hashi appeased Dandan for a moment, and only after the small guy had calmed down, did the two of them then proceed to start working on the spiritual field. Dandan had the nature of a filial son. A moment ago he was still weeping with an aggrieved and pitiful expression, but now that he was accompanying Hashi, he promptly tossed his loneliness to the back of his mind. Yet one moment he was helping Hashi with the farming, and the next he was running circles around her. Running around crazily in the ancient rhyme spiritual field, he made a flower garland and placed it on the top of his head. Mother, does Dandan look good? Having a chubby and plump small guy, with a garland of flowers on top of his head asking whether or not he looked good, Hashi couldn't resist laughing inside. Plastering an expression of admiration and praise onto her face, she nodded. Dandan is the handsomest. Dandan immediately became cheerful, then continued to run around the spiritual field in glee. With his silver bell-like laughter echoing in Hashi's ears, her mood became light and tranquil. Chapter 203, Adorable Little Pig. Of course, what made Heshi the happiest was the nature-defying harvest from the ancient rhyme spiritual field. Looking at the small mountain of spiritual vegetables, spiritual fruits, and spiritual herbs, Heshi's eyebrows raised with delight. In her mind, she calculated the amount of crystal stones she could earn. After she gained the crystal stones, she could use them to reorganize and expand her small courtyard. With all the activity surrounding Song Mountain, she wanted to shore up her courtyard's defenses. Once she had finished sorting out the ancient rhyme spiritual field, she realized that it was now morning outside her space. Stretching out her body, Heshi stroked Dandan's small head. "Okay, I'm going to go now. You behave in here, I'll come and visit you often." No, Dandan tightly clutched Heshi's clothes with tears streaming down his cheeks, unwilling to release her. "Mother, let me go out with you, okay?" Dandan's big, watery, and misty eyes were a weapon that no one could resist. Yet although Heshi felt distressed for a moment, she still firmly shook her head. "No, don't you remember what old man Shumi said? If people were to recognize you, it would be very dangerous. Besides, your appearance is so unusual that it would definitely attract attention." Hearing this, Dandan immediately began crying and rolling about on the ground. Sobbing and sniffling, he refused to speak, instead continuing to loudly weep. This kind of attitude would melt the heart of anyone, even the most hard-hearted person. Heshi sighed. "Dandan, it isn't that I don't want to bring you out, it's just that your appearance is honestly too extraordinary. If I were to let you out, you and I will both be in danger. Unless, you can change your appearance into something less conspicuous." Dandan blinked his big eyes, his golden bean-shaped tears immediately stopping. Lifting his small head, he said, "Change my appearance, like this?" Dandan's voice had barely faded, when a roast suckling pig suddenly appeared before her eyes. The eyes of the roast suckling pig rolled around, looking extremely ridiculous. But aside from that, all the other details, including the alluring fragrance, were exactly the same as with the roast suckling pig that Heshi had previously made. Heshi watched as this roast suckling pig blinked its big eyes, and when it hopped around on its short legs, she couldn't help but laugh. Could her Dandan be any more amusing? While Dandan jumped about excitedly, he asked, Mother, is it okay like this? Dandan's spiritual power doesn't leak either." This was true, Dandan had changed into a roast suckling pig, and except for his eyes, there was nothing unusual about him. He was just like a roast suckling pig, and even with Heshi's sharp senses, she was unable to detect any spiritual power fluctuations coming from his body. It seemed that Dandan's transformation technique, and a common martial artist's transformation technique, were completely different. An ordinary person really wouldn't be able to notice at all. Heshi pondered for a moment, then said to Dandan, "Dandan, change the color of your skin into a pale pink, exactly like that. Now change your height, become a bit smaller. Shorten your nose a little." Under Heshi's instructions, Dandan's appearance changed little by little, until finally, an adorable pale pink little pig stood before her. She had seen this little pig on television before in her past life. It was the leading character of an animated film named McDull, who was once extremely popular in her past life. Since Heshi was an assassin in her previous life, she naturally hadn't had any time to watch cartoons. But once, when she was carrying out a mission, she had glanced at a television and her mind automatically remembered its image. So when Dandan had turned into a roast suckling pig, she naturally thought of it. Looking at Dandan's version of McDull, Heshi nodded. Perfect. Now, you can go out with me." Heshi intended to first test out his appearance in her courtyard. If the people in her courtyard were unable to make out anything unusual about Dandan, then the risk of taking Dandan out of her courtyard with her would be much smaller. 1. McDull. LOL. Chapter 204, Faithful Follower. The result, contrary to Heshi's expectations, was that Dandan's little pale pink pig appearance was unexpectedly well received by Shaoli, Wet Nurse Chen, and the rest of the women in her courtyard. In fact, their love of Dandan was extremely intense. Even the only female amongst the slaves, Shigue, was affected. When she saw Dandan, her eyes shone brightly, while her expression revealed her wish to hold him tightly in her arms. Shaoli, on the other hand, didn't have the same reservations, and promptly hugged Dandan. She then rubbed her small face on his soft and tender skin, her expression as serious as a daughter-in-law's as she asked, "Miss, is this your spirit pet?" "Too adorable. How can there be such an adorable spirit pet in Miluo continent?" Hearing Xiao Li's words, a corner of Heshi's mouth twitched. Because, at the same time in her mind, she could hear Dandan's angry yells. "Mother, this nine-tailed fox is too much. I'm a primary spirit. How can she pinch me like this? This is simply disgraceful. Can I eat her, mother?" "Heshi. You can't." Dandan immediately began crying. "Then mother, quickly help me. Dandan doesn't want to be kissed and hugged by such an odd girl. Dandan's chastity will be damaged. Chastity. I see your integrity seems to have been washed away." Heshi firmly ignored the two small animals, and turned around to describe her business proposal to Zhang San. The current Zhang San had long since stopped being a wicked servant and taking advantage of his position to bully others. After becoming Heshi's servant and succeeding in advancing his cultivation base, he was now Heshi's faithful follower. Servants were usually poor people who were sent to serve as servants for the household of a rich family. In order to earn money to live, they would constantly be thinking of ways to promote their own strengths. Now this young miss was able to help him advance, and not only that, she was also able to pay him much more than Nalan Manor. So, what reason would he have to not be dead set on deeply revering this young miss? Heshi had also seen the changes in Zhang San's behavior and found that, compared to Shi Jia and the others, Zhang San's methods of handling the day-to-day affairs was much more efficient. After all, Shi Jia and the others were previously slaves, so she noticed that their abilities were limited. While on the other hand, Zhang San wasn't able to quickly improve his strength, but he was very adept at dealing with social interactions, making him more skilled than the other people in her courtyard. Zhang San accepted the low-level storage ring that Heshi handed him. After examining what was inside with his divine sense, astonishment lit up his face. "Miss, there's so many spiritual plants in here. Do you want to sell all of them?" His voice was laced with disbelief because this storage ring was filled with all kinds of spiritual plants. Moreover, each spiritual plant was fresh and full of spiritual energy. Where had the young miss managed to get so many spiritual plants from? Heshi nodded as she said, "Go find shopkeeper Zhou in Xingda Hall first. If the price he gives is reasonable, you can sell these spiritual plants to him." Xingda Hall's shopkeeper Zhou Yenan, was the young man who had helped her when she rescued and treated Xiao Li's brother, Wu Qi. Remembering the common people's reaction at that time, she realized that Xingda Hall's reputation was well respected, so regardless of her background or character, it could be assumed that she wouldn't be cheated if these spiritual plants were sold to them. In fact, she was thinking that she would like to establish a long-term contract with Xingda Hall if possible. Zhang San hastily nodded, and very carefully put the storage ring away. But just when Zhang San thought that the young miss had finished giving him her orders, Heshi swiftly took out 2 bottles of medicinal pills, effortlessly throwing them to him. "These are spiritual supplement pills, 1 bottle for you, and the other bottle I want you to take to the market and find out their worth." "Spiritual supplement pills?" Zhang San cried out in surprise. Did you refine them by yourself, miss?" Seeing Heshi nod, Zhang San's dedication to Heshi rose sky high. Is there anything in this world that his young miss couldn't do? Chapter 205, Medicinal Pill Appraisal. "Miss, if I may ask, do these spiritual supplement pills also need to be sold to Xingda Hall?" Heshi shook her head while smiling slightly. "No need, I leave it up to you on how to deal with them, I only need to see a sufficient amount of benefits." The value of a medicinal pill was higher than that of a spiritual plant. He was able to sell her spiritual plants to shopkeeper Zhou, but she wasn't able to sell medicinal pills to him. She was counting on the sale of medicinal pills to earn enough money to accomplish her courtyard's defense system. Zhang San had the bottle of spiritual supplement pills that He had given to him, and he couldn't help but swallow a pill before doing anything else. As a result, intense spiritual power spread throughout his dantian in a flash, circulating to every one of his meridians. It was obviously such a strong force of spiritual power, but where it flowed through his meridians, there wasn't the slightest trace of pain. Instead, he was so comfortable that he wanted to groan. Half an hour later, Zhang San stopped meditating and stood up to examine his cultivation base. Shock immediately flashed across his face. He'd had a breakthrough. Within only half an hour, he had actually managed to break through from the 5th rank of Qi refining stage to the 6th rank Qi refining stage. Moreover, his meridians hadn't suffered any damage, it was as if there were no impurities at all in the medicinal pills. This, is a first-grade spiritual supplement pill supposed to be so strong? Or did the young miss give him a special medicine? Zhang San's eyes shone brilliantly as he hurriedly left the courtyard. First, he brought the spiritual herbs to shopkeeper Zhou to sell, and then he signed a long-term supply contract with him. And without showing the bottle of medicinal pills that he carried, he proceeded to head towards a medicine institute that specialized in appraising medicinal pills. He believed that the spiritual supplement pills that his young miss refined would certainly be graded as extraordinary, for sure they'll be the highest first-grade medicinal pill possible. When it became time for the Medicine Institute to issue an appraisal certificate so that the medicinal pills could be sold at auction, he firmly believed that they would be able to get a good price. Zhang San chose Yanjing City's most famous medicine institute to appraise the medicinal pills, Jinling's Imperial Pharmaceutical Institution. Yet after just entering the Imperial Pharmaceutical Institution, Zhang San found his path abruptly blocked by someone. The servant boy in charge of registration at the Imperial Pharmaceutical Institution noticed Zhang San's wretched clothes and low cultivation base, and he couldn't help but say with contempt, "Hey you, do you know that the cost of appraising a medicinal pill is at least 10 crystals, while the highest appraisal costs 1,000 crystals? Do you have enough for the appraisal fee?" Zhang San's eyes immediately lowered, and from a chest pocket he fished out 100 crystals, placing them on a nearby table. With a quiet voice he then said, "I want an advanced appraisal for a first-grade medicinal pill." When the servant boy saw the 100 crystals, he stared blankly for a moment, before he then registered Zhang San's words. Bursting into a fit of laughter, he said, "You came here just to get an appraisal for a first-grade medicinal pill? Moreover, an advanced appraisal? Does your brain have some sort of illness?" At the Imperial Pharmaceutical Institution, there were different appraisals available for medicinal pills. Of course, the higher the level, the more that could be detected about the composition and element attributes, better allowing the examiner to determine the value of the medicinal pill. But if the medicinal pill itself was of poor quality, then to ask for an advanced appraisal would not only not have any benefits, it would instead reveal the ignorance and stupidity of the owner of the medicinal pill. If the owner were to spend so much money on such an appraisal, it would only end with people mocking them. Zhang San said, "That's right, I want an advanced appraisal on a first-grade medicinal pill. As long as I can afford to pay with crystal stones, what is it any of your business what I want to appraise?" The servant boy sneered, his gaze filled with contempt as he looked at Zhang San. "Nowadays there's no lack of people like you. You accidentally get your hands on a medicinal pill, and then right away you think you picked up a priceless treasure, eagerly coming to us to appraise it. He, let me tell you, people like you will ultimately feel disappointment. Do you still think you've come to appraise a treasure now?" While the servant boy had been speaking, he had registered Zhang San's medicinal pill, ordering someone to deliver it to the evaluation room. With a calm and collected face, Zhang San stood waiting on the side, completely without the intention of refuting the servant boy. Chapter 206, high-grade spiritual supplement pill. Zhang San believed in his young Mrs. medical skill and ability. If she was able to make him, a low-level martial artist, advance from the 3rd rank of Qi refining stage to the 6th rank of Qi refining stage within a few short months, how could it be possible that the medicinal pills she refined were just an ordinary product? Zhang San was waiting for quite a while, and after the servant boy had sent off the last client and noticed he was still sitting and waiting, he couldn't help but sneer. "Fool, it's useless for you to wait. In a moment, the result will come out and you'll find out that you wasted 100 crystals. You can't." The servant boy's words hadn't yet finished, when suddenly, a white-bearded old man abruptly rushed out from the evaluation room. While he was running with an excited and yet nervous look on his face, he yelled, "Number 97? Who brought medicinal pill number 97 in to be appraised?" Zhang San and the servant boy both stared blankly for a moment, before Zhang San looked at the number plate in his hand. He was number 97. With a glance, the white-bearded old man caught sight of the wooden number plate in Zhang San's hand, and like a whirlwind, he rushed over to him. Grabbing Zhang San's hand, he shouted, "Was it you who brought in medicinal pill number 97? Zhang San answered, "Yes, I am." "Was there a problem with the medicinal pill? Was it you who found this medicinal pill? Where did you find it?" Zhang San's cultivation base was only at the 6th rank of Qi refining stage, and moreover, it seemed that his overall innate talent was only ordinary. Of course the old man wouldn't think that Zhang San had refined this medicine. Zhang San shook his head. "That medicine was refined by my master, I didn't find it." The white-bearded old man's brows suddenly rose in surprise, a radiant light appearing in his muddy eyes. "You mean, your master is the one who refined this medicinal pill? It wasn't found? Do you have any other medicinal pills in your possession apart from this one?" Zhang San nodded, and he couldn't help but ask, "So how was it? What are the results of the medicinal pill?" However, the white-bearded old man ignored his question and asked impatiently, "Which great master is your master? Quickly take me to see him." Zhang San's brows wrinkled. "If you have something to tell my master, you can tell me instead. My master is very busy, he has already given me full responsibility to handle all matters dealing with the medicinal pill." Zhang San had always been a shrewd person, so he was obviously aware that He didn't want her identity revealed. How could he stupidly expose young Mrs. information? Hearing this, the white-bearded old man became frustrated. However, thinking about how all great masters were temperamental and eccentric, he was also relieved. This time, when he looked back at Zhang San, he was smiling. "So it's like this, the results of your medicinal pill appraisal have already come out, and no one expected that it would actually be a first-grade medicinal pill of the highest quality. Moreover, the appraisal found that the composition of the medicinal pill was perfect. This old man has never before seen such a perfect medicinal pill. Your master's strength absolutely already surpasses that of this sect master. How could that be possible?" The servant boy exclaimed nearby, his expression one of shock and bewilderment as he looked at Zhang San. As for Zhang San, when the old man had passed over the appraisal results, he only glanced at it before his eyes widened with shock. First-grade spiritual supplement pill, contains 10 crystals worth of spiritual power, 99% essence purity, and suitable for unrestricted long-term usage. This information, was it really that of a first-grade medicinal pill? It was even stronger than a mid-level second-grade medicinal pill. Firstly, the spiritual power contained in most top-level first-grade spiritual supplement pills was at max only 3 crystals worth of spiritual power, and secondly, the 99% essence purity, that was enough to make martial artists go crazy with longing. It meant that even if a martial artist consumed many spiritual pills, they wouldn't have to worry about an overaccumulation of spiritual power. This was practically an amazing way for a low-level martial artist to advance by medicinal pill. I am the vice head of this imperial pharmaceutical institution, and also a 4th-ranked doctor. On behalf of the imperial pharmaceutical institution, I wish to sign a long-term contract with your master for this high-grade spiritual supplement pill. If there are any conditions you may have, we can discuss. Chapter 207, Visiting Tsang Mountain. Zhang San stood in place in a daze, and while he could hear the vice-head of the Imperial Pharmaceutical Institution politely discussing contracts, he only felt dizzy, like he was walking on air. What kind of frightening talent did his young miss possess in the end? If this kind of medicinal pill was to be sold, and this kind of attribute appraisal result was to spread out, it would absolutely turn all of Jinling Kingdom's low-level martial artists upside down, right? While Zhang San was negotiating contract terms, He was standing on a certain hill on the east side of Tsang Mountain. From a distance, she could see plumes of gray fog rising from the top of Tsang Mountain, and as she stared at it, she found herself contemplating. In regards to Tsang Mountain, she had researched about it in some of Mi Luo continent's ancient books and records. It was said that more than 1,000 years ago Tsang Mountain was once full of vitality. However, all in one night, every living thing on Tsang Mountain suddenly died. Moreover, after that, any martial artist that futilely tried to enter into the depths of Tsang Mountain never returned, even their bones couldn't be found. And as time passed, all the spiritual plants growing on Tsang Mountain began to vanish, along with all the animals. The only thing to remain was a powerful darkness, where dark spiritual beasts would occasionally roam. Some people said that Tsang Mountain was cursed, and that anyone who ventured near would be cursed too, until finally, they suffered an unnatural death. He of course didn't believe in curses, but since Tsang Mountain was obviously devoid of spiritual power fluctuations, it really gave her a strange feeling. The thing she found strangest of all though, was that she felt like something in Tsang Mountain was faintly calling to her, and as time went on, this feeling only became stronger. Recalling that some time ago there was a blast of power, followed by spiritual beasts that headed towards her courtyard from Tsang Mountain, He's brows wrinkled. It was fortunate that last time Shaoli was able to hold it back, so that the people in her courtyard were able to escape from disaster. But if it were to happen again, everyone would certainly be in danger. Glancing at Shi Jia and the others that were currently training in the valley, she then turned to glance at her courtyard where there was a curl of smoke rising from the kitchen chimney. Abruptly, she quietly said, "Dandan, we're going to enter Tsang Mountain and have a look around." Standing beside her, Dandan immediately lit up with happiness once he heard this and said gleefully, "Okay." Dandan wants to go on an adventure together with Mother. The most recently, the things occurring in the vicinity of Tsang Mountain had made He become somewhat concerned. The current atmosphere surrounding Tsang Mountain was very unstable, it was nowhere near calm and safe. Instead, it was very likely that since every major force in the Jinling Kingdom would end up fighting over the secret territory, this area would become a slaughterhouse. Although she was fond of this courtyard, in the end, the people here were more important to her than any object. So for those people, she would head to the east side of Tsang Mountain and properly examine it. If it turned out that it wasn't suitable to stay here anymore, she would still be able to move everyone as quickly as possible. Bringing only Dandan along with her, He didn't notify Wet Nurse Chen and the others. Instead, she chose to trust Shaoli to pass on the message, before she then entered Tsang Mountain. As she only planned to quickly examine the east side of Tsang Mountain, she assumed that she wouldn't be away for more than 3 days. Since He had been watching the black fog rising from Tsang Mountain at a distance for quite a while now, she figured that the area closer to the mountain would be covered in a thick layer of fog, permeated with a sinister aura. However, as she got closer, she discovered that there were a lot of healthy green plants. Moreover, although there were no spiritual plants, and also no spiritual energy, the air was actually fresh and clean. There were even quite a lot of unknown wild flowers growing on the roadside, each of them emitting bursts of a flowery fragrance capable of lifting a person's spirit. Dandan, who had been closed away in He's space, and then the courtyard for a long time, was now like a wild horse out of control as he ran around everywhere, exploring this unusual and vast area inside of Tsang Mountain. He of course wasn't actually worried about Dandan's safety, as the two of them were connected. If Dandan was to run into danger, she would naturally be able to be there straight away. But, Not long after entering Song Mountain, the previously frolicking Dandan ran back to her, his small and short legs trembling. Chapter 208, Disappearing Food. As soon as he saw Hashi, he clutched her leg and started sobbing. "Mother, there's a monster up ahead. I'm scared." Hashi became apprehensive. A monster? Except for a few dark spiritual beasts, there were no other kinds of animals in Song Mountain, right? Could it be that maybe what Dandan ran into was a spiritual beast? With great difficulty she appeased Dandan, and with him leading the way, Hashi cautiously walked forward. Not long after, the huge figure of a monster was reflected in Hashi's eyes, yet she couldn't help but release a sigh of relief, before she then burst out into a fit of laughter. What spiritual beast? This is only the large skeleton of a spiritual beast, that's all. But then, this spiritual beast's skeleton was really huge. The height of the skeleton was 3 times taller than Hashi, and if it was still alive, it would certainly be a huge monster that could terrify everyone. Hashi poked Dandan's head, unhappily saying, "You're such a coward. That's just a skeleton, yet it unexpectedly made you so scared." Dandan was still shrinking behind Hashi, and as he nervously peeked at the skeleton, his small body slightly trembled. No longer paying him any heed, Hashi walked towards the skeleton and carefully inspected it. She couldn't recognize what spiritual beast this skeleton was from, however, this skeleton was still completely intact. From its outside appearance she couldn't see any visible scars, or even any signs of poisoning. Picking up a piece of bone, Hashi examined its density, finding that this spiritual beast was in the prime of its life and full of vitality. Yet from the bone's color, this spiritual beast had died at least a few hundred years ago. What could have caused such a giant spiritual beast to wordlessly die, and without even the hint of a bruise? Hashi was puzzled. What had occurred at Song Mountain during that time? Following the discovery of the spiritual beast bones, Hashi and Dandan entered further inside Song Mountain. The deeper they traveled, the more skeletons they saw, skeletons of all different kinds of spiritual beasts, and even human bones. Every skeleton was completely intact, and no skeleton showed any traces of scarring or bruising. It was like in one breath they had suddenly died, without leaving any traces of a struggle. The more Hashi saw, the more apprehensive she became. To be able to make all living things on the mountain die without them having the strength to resist, how formidable was that power? Did the so-called Song Mountain curse really exist? Hashi was deep in thought, when suddenly, she heard the sound of a stomach gurgling. As soon as she bowed her head, it was to see Dandan using 2 of his small piglet hooves to clasp his belly. When he noticed Hashi watching him, he laughed foolishly. Once he had seen that first spiritual beast skeleton and experienced such a fright, and then seen so many spiritual beast skeletons along the way, Dandan had slowly begun to calm down. So now, every time he saw those smooth bones, all he could think of was delicious roast suckling pig. As a result, his stomach began to growl in hunger. Hashi looked at the color of the sky, and noticed that the sun was high in the clouds, indicating that it was now noon, lunchtime. So from her space, she removed all the food that she had prepared in advance, barbecue meats, creamy soup, cool vegetables, all kinds of pastries, fruit salad, and even fruit juice made from spiritual fruit. It was like they were about to sit down for a leisurely picnic. Dandan held a piece of barbecued meat covered in grease to his mouth, and as he ate one side of it, he shouted, "Mother, the dishes that Mother makes are the best in this world, so delicious." After he finished devouring a chicken leg, Dandan extended a hoof to grab another piece. However, his hoof didn't make contact with the familiar tender and fragrant meat, rather, it landed on an ice-cold tray. Dandan unwillingly extended his hoof to another dish, only to find that it was empty too. Grumbling under his breath, he got up and crawled onto the tablecloth to see the trays, yet what greeted him was a strange scene. The tablecloth, previously overflowing with an arrangement of food, was now completely empty. One by one, all the food on every bowl and tray had disappeared without a trace. Even the soup had disappeared without a drop remaining. Chapter 209. Thief Dandan suddenly remembered the skeletons he saw on the way, and he immediately pounced into Heshi's arms, panicking as he said, "Mother, there's ghosts, really real ghosts." Dandan scared. When Dandan had been in her space before it came to her and had been able to follow the owner of the previous space around, he had experienced a lot of human world knowledge. Ghost stories were one of them. So even though the cowardly Dandan was born as a powerful primary spirit, he was very afraid of ghosts. Although Heshi wasn't afraid, she still found this scene strange, so with a grave expression she wholeheartedly became alert. She didn't believe in supernatural beings like Dandan, especially in such a world where cultivation was real. The so-called supernatural beings were nothing more than the original souls of martial artists, that's all. But the scene before her eyes nevertheless caused her to become dumbstruck. After all, what sort of creature was able to make strange things happen in front of her, yet do it without letting her sense the slightest clue? Heshi got up to look around, and yet after still not finding anything, she checked and found that the food on the tablecloth was still rapidly disappearing. Heshi coldly snorted and suddenly waved one hand, collecting all the remaining food back into her space. The next moment, a familiar voice was immediately heard, "Hey! Where did it all disappear to? I still haven't finished eating yet, put it back, quickly, quickly. That duck wing was really delicious. Girl, how did you make it? Give this old man 20 more pieces." A corner of Heshi's mouth twitched, and soon, an old man's body reeking of wine became visible. Surprisingly, it was the old beggar man that had been pestering her yesterday. She frowned and said, "Smelly old man, has no one ever told you what a thief is? With this type of morality and conduct, you still have the nerve to say that you're a large sect master?" "Ooh, baby doll is too stingy," the old beggar man stroked his messy beard and laughed loudly. "Aren't all delicacies of the world meant to be shared with others? Besides, we know each other, baby girl, so how can you regard me as a stranger? Quick, bring the food out again, I'm still not full." Ah, those duck wings, and there was also roast duck, so delicious. I've lived for so many years, and yet I've never eaten such delicious food before. Heshi's brows slightly raised. This old beggar man, although his behavior was crazy and weird, his strength was absolutely top grade. Suddenly taking out a roast rabbit leg from her space, she lightly swayed it in front of the old beggar man's face. With saliva sliding down from a corner of his mouth, he pounced at the roast rabbit leg. Heshi unhurriedly asked, "Want to eat it?" The old beggar man nodded repeatedly, lacking the slightest bit of decorum. Heshi then sternly said, "Then tell me, what happened to Tsang Mountain and why are there so many spiritual beast skeletons inside? What are those martial artists fighting over?" The old beggar man's expression abruptly stiffened, before he then laughed loudly. "Ooh, baby doll, didn't you say that you weren't interested in Tsang Mountain's secret territory? Why are you inquiring about it all of a sudden?" Heshi sneered. "I'm not interested in the secret territory, but the area I live in is located at the base of this mountain. I have to find out what kind of place Tsang Mountain is as my neighbor, and whether or not it'll be a future threat." The expression on the old beggar man's face flickered through countless emotions, before he then finally said, "Ah, I just came here to have a stroll, that's all. The secret of Tsang Mountain and whatnot, how could this old man know?" "Oh. Since that's the case, Dandan, this is for you to eat." Dandan took the roast rabbit leg from Heshi's hand. After he devoured it clean, he then held his small plump belly while laughing, "Mother, it's so delicious, I want more." Chapter 210, Fighting Over Food, Ah! Such a waste, such a waste. The old beggar man said as he watched the disappearing rabbit leg, flinging his beard around in distress. "I say, baby doll, why are you so serious? No matter what you want to say, I'm still your master. Presenting food to this old man as a show of filial respect is only proper. Hashi sneered, when did I agree to pay my respects to you as a master? Stop speaking nonsense. Ah, it won't hurt you if you pay your respects to me. Why would you rather give your food to this guy, but not give any to me? It's simply unfilial of you. After the old beggar man said this, he suddenly waved his hand in the air. Dandan, who had still been rubbing his belly, abruptly appeared being held by his neck by the old beggar man and hanging in midair. Hashi instantly turned pale. Moving so fast her figure flashed, she rushed over to snatch Dandan back. However, no matter how fast Hashi moved, she couldn't even touch a corner of the old beggar man's clothes. While Dandan loudly cried, the old beggar man stroked his beard and laughed raucously. Baby doll, your innate skill is pretty good, but if you want to snatch this thing from my hand, then it's still too early for you. The light in Hashi's eyes slowly become icy cold, and closing them, she suddenly extended an arm. The next moment, the old beggar man's body was knocked down with a thump. Ooh, so you've landed the first strike. You unexpectedly have such a keen sense of intuition. Even if the old beggar man was taken down, Dandan was still captured by him, only now, he was floating in the air. Watching Hashi with a satisfied smile, he laughed happily. The more I learn about you, the more eager I become to accept you as a disciple. Hashi's face was cold as she looked up and watched as Dandan struggled in vain in the air, and she said with a grave voice, "What do you want?" The old beggar man's face fell, and he pitifully said, "Baby doll, do you still have any of that roast rabbit leg? I've been hungry for many days and I haven't really eaten till full." "Forget it. It's just food anyways, she still has plenty more. She's a normal person, she won't bother arguing with this crazy old beggar man." When the old beggar man saw the food, how could he care about holding Dandan hostage anymore? Who cares about paying respects towards a master? He exclaimed as he rushed towards the spread of food. And so once Dandan fell from the air with great difficulty and saw that his precious food was now being eaten by someone, he immediately forgot his previous fear and furiously yelled as he rushed forward, "Smelly old man, you're not allowed to eat my food. Mother's food is mine." Hashi held her forehead in resignation. This brainless little pig. He really made her not want to acknowledge him as her spirit pet. For a time, the old beggar man and Dandan began to compete in who could eat the most. So in the time it took to burn a stick of incense, the tablecloth that had been covered in food was completely demolished by the pair. Moreover, most of the dishes were meat dishes. The old beggar man rubbed his distended stomach and released a satisfied hum. Having been able to eat such delicious food in this lifetime, this old man could easily die without regret now. The food that mother makes, Dandan can eat it every day. Dandan pointed his small butt towards the old beggar man and scowled. In the future, only Dandan can eat it. I won't give you any to eat. Little guy, why are you the same as your master, so evil? The old beggar man joked, yet as he examined Dandan, a trace of suspicion appeared in his eyes. This pink little pig was apparently that girl's spirit pet, but the aura emitted from this spirit pet was unusual. It appeared different compared with a common spirit pet, even he was unable to see through its disguise. Although there were spirit pets able to speak on Miluo continent, it was very rare for a spirit pet to have such a high intelligence. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.